Councillor Hess is making a non-significant, non-pecuniary declaration of interest for item 13. Any other declarations? No declarations? Excellent. I'll move that that be adopted. Is there a seconder for that? Seconded by Councillor McKenna. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously. I'd ask everyone to please stand for a moment of quiet contemplation. Please be seated. Next item is the confirmation of the minutes of both the meetings on the 10th of December and the 11th of February. Councillors will recall that we deferred adoption of the minutes for the meeting of the 10th of December at our last ordinary council meeting for the reason that councillors were going to seek clarification about one particular vote or piece of wording.
Mr. Speaker, many thanks to Ian and Catherine. They looked at the video and identified that they were correct and that I was wrong. So I'm happy to accept the minutes as they are. It relates to a minor amendment in relation to supporting electric vehicles, which I'm sure we can deal with on a separate notice of motion.
Okay, Councillor Kiat will move adoption of the minutes of the 10th of December meeting. Are there any corrections or clarifications to the February 11 meeting minutes? No? Is there a seconder for adoption? Seconded by Councillor McKenna. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously. Which brings us to the public forum, where we'll have a chance to hear from all of the registered speakers for the various items tonight. Those items include item 6, Housing and Transport Strategies, Post-Exhibition Report. Item 7, Draft Local Strategic Planning Statement, Post-Exhibition Report. Item 10, Voluntary Planning Agreement Policy. Item 14, Local Traffic Committee meeting of the 2nd of December and of the 3rd of February. And that's it. So before I go to each of those items, I'll just clarify with the officers, it appears that we have 4 registered speakers against the recommendation for item 6. Is that correct?
I'd like to move that we hear all the registered speakers.
I think that sounds fair enough. They're probably different issues. Okay, that's moved by Councillor Hesse, seconded by Councillor Stamoulis. All those in favour, against, declare that carried. The first registered speaker is Dominic Hunt of Sydney, representing Mirvac, who's against the recommendation. Dominic, you here?
Thank you, Mayor Byrne. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening as Council considers the adoption of the draft Inner West Local Housing Strategy and the draft Local Strategic Planning Statement. Sure. Yeah, no problem. Is that any better or a bit worse? Quite good. I'll go back to my theatre days, maybe. So I acknowledge that it has been a significant body of work by Council to prepare these strategies and the local strategic planning statement, and I'd like to commend the officers for that. So my name is Dominic Hunt, and I'm a Senior Development Manager at Mirvac. We've been working with the landowners, Harry and John Harrilambides, on a new vision for the site known as East Carrington Road since about 2014. It's safe to say that the community engagement that has been undertaken by the project team over the last 2 years is well above best practice, and it was hoped would be the benchmark for future large-scale urban renewal projects across Sydney. Mirvac and the landowners submitted an extensive response to the draft Inner West Local Housing Strategy and put forward that the draft strategy, in its current form, should not be endorsed for the following reasons. The draft strategy has significant methodological limitations, including an overly ambitious capacity assumption and unrealistic take-up rates of identified capacity.
Your time has expired. Thank you very much. Okay, next registered speaker is Joe Blackman of Dulwich Hill.
That's okay. I'll speak loud. Oh, okay, thank you. Thank you. I've lived in Grove Street, Dulwich Hill for 33 years, a few metres from Arlington Light Rail Station. I've witnessed massive change in our suburbs. Not all of it has been good. I argue... Thank you. I speak about the Arlington and Waratah Mills section of the report, which I know best. I'm deeply concerned about the veracity of some of the claims. If this is true of other sections, then the report needs to urgently be revisited. The maths for the number of dwellings in Arlington does not add up, and why are we using data that's 3 years out of date? Claims that the Greenway is now funded. It's my understanding that only half of the money has been found. The Greenway brings only one new park, no mention of our existing parks which are already overused at the weekends. Dulwich Hill has only 4.5 square metres of open space per person, far below the benchmark of 13.3. No mention. Claims that the Metro could distribute use in both directions to free up the light rail line. The Metro city stations and the light rail stations are not close to each other, and will not change the pattern use of travel. Most of our public servants will have relocated to Parramatta by the end of this year, and many will need cross-linkages to the T1 and T2 line. Claims that building of the Greenway will provide an opportunity for development along the light rail corridor. This will mean more light, noise, cigarette butts, dead plants, rubbish falling or thrown from balconies into the corridor. And in Western Street will highly impact the Greenway's most valuable small bird habitat. Western Street is the bike boulevard. Increased density means more cars, creating greater danger to inexperienced bike riders such as myself. Duplicating the light rail at Dulwich Hill will remove a large area of the skate park, one of the few areas of unstructured play, for our teenagers. Any additional capacity will quickly be soaked up by our current and already planned housing stock. Dual access lots are few in number and may have already been developed. My home is now in shadow from what is known as the Stasi building by 3 p.m. during winter and from 2 p.m. for the 6 weeks in midwinter. Some 50 units opposite me receive less than 2 hours of solar access. Some receive no solar access. I would not wish this on anyone. I was distressed to read that our block will be investigated for place-based analysis. Our block is a humble block of workers' cottages and where people like myself, a single woman, small families have been able to buy. And I ask that you don't take this away from us. Thank you.
Next speaker is Mark Skelsey of Dulwich Hill.
Thanks, councillors, for the opportunity to speak on these important documents. I'm a Dulwich Hill resident and also a member of the Save Dully Action Group. I would like to raise a number of issues of concern about these documents, which I think means they should be deferred tonight. As councillors, first I'd like to raise the issue of how the housing strategy deals with the council's existing biodiversity corridor and greenway. As councillors may be aware, the existing Marrickville LEP contains a biodiversity corridor which runs roughly from Lewisham West through to Marrickville West, roughly following the Greenway corridor. In these mapped areas, applicants are required to take special effort to avoid and minimise impacts on terrestrial biodiversity, including the bandicoot. And Marrickville Council's guide to planning, in fact, says that disturbance to 25% or more of the site may impact on bandicoot habitat. According to the council report you have before you tonight, an amendment has been made to the housing strategy to refer to the biodiversity corridor and the greenway as a constraint on development, which I support. However, on closer inspection, this constraint has only been included in Dulwich Hill's Arlington and Waratah Mills precincts, but not in the precinct around Dulwich Hill Station, and has not actually been listed in the constraint constraint sections of the strategy alongside issues such as heritage or flooding. This doesn't make any sense to me at all. The biodiversity corridor runs through the entire suburb of Dulwich Hill and should be reflected as such across the document. Separately, the Greenway is listed as a constraint on development in one section of the document and as an opportunity in the other. So I don't think anyone can understand what this document's actually trying to say. In addition, the housing strategy still has unnecessarily inflammatory language which refers to Dulwich Hill being one of the least constrained suburbs areas for development in the LGA, still refers to the Sydenham to Bankstown corridor as having the potential for significant uplift and major development sites. And this is after we've been through a long battle with the council for planning in this corridor. It's inappropriate language which undermines confidence for ongoing planning in our suburb that will be community-led and respectful of character. The strategy still has a very prescriptive approach to concentrating development between Dulwich Hill train station and Dulwich Grove light rail station, which will put it at odds with the biodiversity corridor and almost certainly involve the rezoning of existing residential areas. It differs greatly from Save Dully's positive plan for the suburb, which will deliver housing growth and support for our retail centres, but limits impacts on residential areas. Finally, there's a statement in the council report that the strategic planning statement has been amended to refer to the council undertaking collaboration with the Department of Planning on a high-level principle-based planning strategy for Marrickville and Dulwich Hill. There needs to be greater clarity about what this collaboration actually means, as it could be interpreted as handing planning control back to the government. I think there is a case to defer the housing strategy tonight to cover some of the issues I mentioned. I'll just finish up, Mr Mayor. Have a greater consideration of submissions from Dulwich Hill, including Save Dully, consistently reflect the biodiversity corridor and the Greenway as a constraint on development, be less prescriptive in its proposed development approach, and such a deferral would reflect that the fact that the suburb of Dulwich Hill had more submissions to both of these documents than any other suburb across the LGA. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr Guy Robb of Lewisham.
Good evening, thanks for giving me the chance to speak. I'm an owner at 41 Old Canterbury Road, Lewisham. I'm actually speaking on behalf of a group from 35 all the way up to 45 Old Canterbury Road. We've actually submitted to the LSPS a fairly lengthy submission, and basically the upshot is that in the Parramatta Road Corridor Strategy document, our patch is slated for upzoning, and that's because of our proximity to transport, and the housing strategy document is consistent with this. So that's the context for my comment. So in August 2018, Council voted to accept $2.5 million from the state government to introduce a consolidated LEP by June 2020. A key condition is to implement growth in key areas, one of which is the Parramatta Road Corridor. This housing strategy does deal with these considerations, with our area, Taverners Hill, being considered an investigation area starting in 2019. However, this housing strategy will rely on an LEP to implement the strategy. The upcoming LEP will not change any zoning or reflect the investigations that this housing study recommends, even though it was a condition of receiving the funding from the state government. It's 2020 already and the investigation has not started, and I've had this confirmed with conversation with members of the strategic planning team at council. It means that this housing strategy and the timeline within it are inaccurate. For example, the housing study recognises that Taverners Hill, which currently has 900 dwellings, will need to absorb an extra 460 dwellings, with the current controls only accommodating 52 of those. Therefore, it is clear that the controls need to change in order for this housing strategy to be implemented, and the recommended implementation timeline is from 2021. A main planning initiative is to move away from spot rezoning and to have a broader strategic vision for planning, but the worry is that this housing strategy is not tying into the new LEP, and that council, with the new voluntary planning agreement, is encouraging development on an ad hoc basis and will benefit from this by capturing a share of the value uplift. This housing strategy document, which I and the owners of 35 to 45 Old Canterbury Road, Lewisham, are supportive of, is consistent with the broader strategic framework of the state and city, but is its deliverability realistic, and are the timings in this document realistic? In the context of other planning documents that need to be delivered to make this strategy a reality. Our view is that it's unlikely to be realistic. Therefore, if it isn't realistic, it's hard for us as a community and ownership group to know what and when things are likely to occur. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Robb. Next speaker is Anthony Macera of Ashfield.
Thank you, councillors, for inviting me. The issue is the important need to include Ashfield in council planning from 2020, not 2026. So my name is Tony Macera, and today I'm representing the Ashfield North Revitalisation Committee. The committee is a small group that effectively represents many in the community with interest in Ashfield and especially the precinct north of the station. We've had 3 meetings with council at senior level, commencing from 2018. We've also employed town planners to assist us in understanding the many studies that has brought us to this position. We've made a comprehensive submission to council which sets out our ideas to advance Ashfield generally and the Ashfield North precinct specifically. We've examined many of the plans and I won't go through them now. It is clear that the state government and the Inner West Council have invested tens of thousands of dollars, if not more, in producing these plans with commendable vision, statements and aspirational targets. I won't list those, but they're good. Present position. I'll now turn to the subject of Ashfield and Ashfield North and the important need to include Ashfield in council planning from 2020, not 2026, as listed in our Inner West draft housing strategy. Ashfield's been ignored. Concerns. I'm concerned that it appears that planning for Ashfield will not start until after 2026. Despite Ashfield having a heavy rail station with excellent rail services and excellent bus connections, a suburb, as we know, with many schools, churches, shortly a new aquatic centre, major shopping centres and so on, has been left as part of the planning. I'm concerned that the Ashfield North, despite being within 5 minutes walk to the station, having the same benefits as the broader suburb, and potential increased residential accommodation for perhaps as many as 200 to 300 residential units, has once again been overlooked in the present plans. The development controls for Ashfield South are quite commendable. The development controls for the north are backward. Ashfield North is within easy walking distance of Ashfield Station and good public transport, a prerequisite for increased housing in the right locations. The good intentions of the many well-researched and high-level plans have left Ashfield precincts adjacent to the station apparently off the agenda. The future tangible benefits for the people of Ashfield and those who wish to live in Ashfield are missing in action. So I'll come to my recommendations. That the potential of Ashfield, both north and south of the station, be seriously considered for increasing housing accommodation from 2020, not as now planned in the future for 2026. The council proceeds from 2020 with a place-based studies of both the north and south areas of Ashfield, especially within 200 metres of the station, as the Elton report identifies these areas as having potential for housing increases. And lastly, that the North Ashfield precinct be considered more fully as a prospect for extension of the town centre, and that the planning controls for the Ashfield North precinct be increased to match those presently applying in the south. Mr Chairman, I thank the council for their interest and urge them to reconsider and amend the strategic plans to include the future of Ashfield from 2020, not 2026. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Macera. David Collins-White of Croydon.
Thank you, councillors and councillor officers. My name's David Collins-White. I'm the chair of the Housing and Affordability Committee, which is one of the democracy committees of the Inner West Council. I sent our draft submission for the local housing strategy to all the councils, which address a number of the issues to do with the local housing strategy. So I won't address that in this short speech, except to say that overall we are supportive of the draft Inner West local housing strategy. I want to come to addressing the amendments that are mentioned in the motion tonight. First of all, include actions for affordable housing, including advocacy to the state government and investigating planning mechanisms. In this, we want to note that there are a number of actions which are already included in the draft housing strategy. For example, Principle 4, which is addressed on page 86 and 87, There are 13 actions which deal with this. Also, in the local strategic planning statement, there refers to a working closely with state government and other stakeholders to improve the affordable housing framework, to increase the provision of affordable housing for very low and moderate income households, which is on page 40 for your reference. The second amendment, which I want to address, is the recommend compliance to the livable housing guidelines. Reference has already been made to this in achieving the Silver Standard Rehousing Livability Guidelines, which deals with the design of houses and universal design of houses, and it's already noted in the LSPS. So, I'm just wondering if that could be already incorporated in that amendment. The third amendment is include an action to work with specialist disability providers to increase accessibility housing in the key accessible areas. In the draft housing strategy, it refers to partnerships with National Disability Insurance Scheme for the specialist disability housing. This is referred to on page 74 and 75. Also, the LSPS refers to collaborating with external providers of housing, community housing and special disability accommodation to increase supply of affordable housing. The last amendment I'd like to address, my colleague here has already addressed the biodiversity corridor and Bandicoot, which we support, include key performance indicators to measure supply and demand for affordable housing in the LGA, including the Council's affordable housing portfolio. There's key performance indicators already existing in affordable housing policy in section 2.9, and we'd like those acknowledged in these amendments. Thank you for listening.
So I'm actually Harold Beatties. I'd registered as well. I wanted to know, Mr. Mayor, is it possible to just put some handouts to the councillors and the audience, please? And if I could just put some boards.
Was registered for this item, but you're registered for the next item, for item 7.
Well, just one of us will speak.
Okay.
Yeah, just one of us.
No worries.
It's a long night.
Yep, all good, thank you. Hope everyone else can follow your lead.
Yeah. So does that mean I can get an extra couple of minutes?
You should be on council. Okay, please proceed.
Okay, so I'm Harold Beatties, one of the landowners down on East Carrington Road in Marrickville. So I just wanted to point out that in the report it mentions Carrington Road not to be rezoned or for that precinct to be rezoned, but we have to deal with flooding to the extent of where we get inundated with up to 1 metre of water when we get heavy rain. On the 9th of February, we had nearly every tenant, we've got about 200 plus tenants, everyone got affected with flooding. And following that, I've had one of my tenants that employs approximately 100 factory staff, both full-time, casuals and part-time workers that have given me 6 weeks notice. End of March, they're going to close up their factory. They're moving out to Milpera. I've got another furniture wholesaler that employs about 10 staff. He's on the brink of closing up. He's been affected that many times. He's lost about $200,000 in stock on that event on the 9th of February. I've got another company that hires out furniture to people that are selling or leasing their houses, that they'd go in and dress them up. They had the majority of their hire stock got wet, mattresses, lounges, the like. we've got another clothing manufacturing company that employs about approximately 50 staff. They haven't been able to reinstate their factory. It's a mess there. We've tried to help them as much as we can, but they're deciding whether they'll appoint an administrator to wind up their business. So across those couple of tenants that I've mentioned, there's approximately 200 staff. If the point of not rezoning Carrington Road is to protect employment land, it's going to be derelict employment land soon. There's hundreds of, like in the next, with the one tenant that is moving at the end of March, there's 100 staff gone to another municipality. When we do sandbag the building and put sandbags around access points and that, we've been getting fined up to $1,500 a time because we've got sandbags across the entry into the building or a roller shutter or whatever. We've been in Carrington Road ourselves operating our own business going back some 25 years, and this problem has just got worse and worse and worse. We keep asking for this to be rectified, but no one wants to put their hands in their pocket. Thank you. So I'm close to wrapping up. All we ask is that the community and council support us so that we can master plan the Carrington Road precinct so that some of the benefits that we will provide in a redevelopment there, and we will be providing industrial space in that precinct so that we can accommodate tenants that are currently there, plus creative industries, plus the mum and dad little businesses. We want to accommodate them in a new development, plus put some residential so that we can solve the flooding problems in Carrington Road and give some open space back to the community. We're planning on 2 mini sports fields up the southern end to complement Mackey Park. We've got up on the northern end some hard court sports for basketball, skating. We're looking at a performing arts centre and community centre and urban landscaping across the site. Sorry?
If you could conclude your remarks.
Yep. So that's all we're asking is for some support back to the state government to allow us to rezone so that we can fix this flooding problem once and for all. And in 50 years' time, when they're saying global sea levels will rise 2 metres, Carrington Road won't be part of the Cooks River. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Next item is item 7. The first registered speaker is again Dominic Hunt, representing Mirvac. You wish to speak again, Dominic?
No, you can take the first remarks.
Thank you. Mark Skelsey of Dulwich Hill. No. Okay. And then we had Harry, already covered, which brings us to item 10. Voluntary Planning Agreement Policy, David Collins-White of Croydon. Again. David, are you speaking again? Right, let someone check on that. Item. Right.
Sorry. What happens when you're a teacher? Parents ring you up. Okay, so I'm addressing, again, I'm David Collins-White, I haven't changed. Thank you for listening, councillors and council officers. I'm addressing item 10, the Voluntary Planning Agreement Policy. Overall, the HAAC, which I represent, are supportive of the agreement, the Voluntary Planning Agreement. However, we'd like to move the following amendments. In the policy that we've examined at the moment, there is a need to adequately account for the 15% target for affordable housing in the affordable housing policy, which the council has adopted. And it's not clearly outlined in that we can see in the voluntary planning agreement, and we think this is very important. Two, We'd like better definition for the residual land value model and apply it consistently. We'd like independent valuations for the residential land value. 4, we think there is a need to establish a process for an independent panel of valuers to review the RLV, or the residual land value. Because I already said residential, it should have been residual land value. Again, in relation to the residual land value, the model should include all costs of development, including local developer contributions. And lastly, but not least, we'd like to see an audit of the voluntary planning agreement, especially where it applies to any cash contributions which developers put in for the purpose of the affordable housing over the last 10 years. And we'd like to see that for the proposed affordable housing fund, which our committee is looking into at the way it's set up at the moment, proposed to be set up. So we'd like those considerations as amendments to this voluntary planning agreement policy. Thank you very much.
Meetings. The first speaker is Kim Adolphi of Rozelle. Kim, are you here?
Chair, no. Kim and Jeanette won't be coming in because they received an email saying their matter is being dealt with by the staff. So they won't be speaking tonight.
Okay, thank you for that.
But we will see them if it doesn't happen in that time frame.
Right. Our next speaker is Graham Kerr of Ashfield.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, councillors. My name's Graham Kerr and I'm a resident of Cardinal Freeman Retirement Village located at Ashfield. As the councillors are aware, I emailed a detailed document to each and I respectfully request that you look at that document. Our village is bounded by 4 streets being Victoria, Clissold, Queen and Seaview. Victoria and Queen are major thoroughfares while Clissold and Seaview are minor connecting streets. Most of the minor streets in the area are one way, and the western end of Seaview Street, it too is one way. Residents are requesting that Clissold and Seaview be changed to opposing directional one-way streets. The advantages of this would be a much more equitable distribution of traffic, commensurate improvement in road safety and an improved traffic flow arrangement for all traffic including buses. In 2016, GTA consultants were commissioned by the then Ashfield Council to investigate and report on traffic matters within the area. In their report, they supported Clissold and Seaview becoming opposing directional one-way streets to improve cross-sectional operation, as it is difficult for two-way movements to be accommodated, noting it is a bus route. At the time of the report, Opal and Cardinal Freeman were being built and have since had a massive impact on Clissold. Clissold Street has elderly pedestrian traffic, some with mobility issues. There are 5 schools close to Clissold and groups of school children commonly congregate in the street waiting for buses. William Street, off Clissold Street, has a playground which is often frequented by families. Regarding footpath widths, the Clissold are narrower than Seaview. Regarding services for visitors to Sydney Private Hospital, there are existing bus options to travel to Seaview. Pardon me. It doesn't make sense to preference a few visiting travellers over elderly residents permanently living on the south side of Cardinal Freeman. Other recommendations from the Traffic Committee, curb island build-outs and speed humps or cushions may not impact on Clissold Street problem. Causing congestion is not a good solution for Clissold. Those people who are most vulnerable, our elderly and children, are being asked to negotiate complex traffic conditions. These cannot be picked up in a traffic survey. Looking at the traffic and pedestrian movements, it might well be a good idea to introduce a one-way system. That's how it seems to residents who observe these movements daily. However, we are not the experts, but in 2016, GTA consultants, who are the experts, supported Clissold and Seaview becoming opposing directional one-way streets. The residents can only state the facts, and the facts are that we have a problem which is getting worse. Something needs to be done, and we think that something is a one-way system. Thank you for listening.
Johnson of Marrickville.
The proposal to extend the no stopping zone on the eastern side of Carrington Road is welcome, but it does not fully address the seriousness of pedestrian safety on Carrington Road. In 2008, Tempe High School had a population of 941 students. This is up from 722 in 2008, which represents a 30% increase in the student population over a 10-year period. There's an upward trend in the number of students from Ferncourt Public School on the other side of Carrington Road enrolling in Tempe, with a 63% increase in the last 3 years. The 2017 Made in Marrickville report identified 223 enterprises on Carrington Road that employed in excess of 1,800 people on a full-time basis. As Sydney loses other industrial zones, Carrington Road only grows, and with it, pedestrian activity. A 2009 survey that, for some reason, failed to include residents conducted for the Marrickville Pedestrian Access and Mobility Plan Review identified 5 main concerns, with pedestrian safety the number 1 concern and the lack of pedestrian crossings at number 4. In 2019, data from the RMS collated by Council's road safety officers revealed that the Inner West LGA has the highest percentage of casualties amongst pedestrians as well as bicycle and motorbike riders, and this continues to rise. In 2017, the Inner West Council launched a campaign aimed at improving pedestrian safety in response to figures showing that the Inner West has a higher incidence of pedestrian casualties. Then, in 2019, Council announced it was taking a holistic approach to pedestrian safety, again in response to figures showing that pedestrian casualties continue to rise. Pedestrian traffic on Carrington Road will only increase in coming years, hello Harry, especially if development applications for the precinct are successful. Based on current trends, the student population at Tempe High School will also increase, and a proportion of those numbers will cross Carrington Road. The RMS advises that Carrington Road is classified as a local road, and as such it falls under the jurisdiction of the Inner West Council. So, councillors, it's within your power to approve a pedestrian crossing for Carrington Road, one that is used, the road being heavily used by children. You know the area will be developed, so improved pedestrian safety is inevitable. So why not get ahead of the infrastructure curve now and approve it sooner rather than later before a child is seriously injured or killed? Your own reports state that children are small, harder to see, behave unpredictably, and are extremely vulnerable. In the event of an injury or death, it would be hard to argue that the council has not been made fully aware for years of this risk. Thanks for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much. That was very helpful. Okay, that concludes our registered speakers for the public forum. I'm now going to move to mayoral minutes.
Mayor, could I just move a motion that we suspend standing orders and bring forward the items that members of the public have spoken on this evening, which would be items 6, 7, 10 and 14.
I'm going to consider that motion after the tabling of the mayoral minutes, all of which have been held over from the last meeting when you moved the same procedural motion.
Yeah, as a process, I've actually moved a process motion. You are required to actually test that process motion before.
No, that's not the case. Mayoral minutes can be tabled at any time during the meeting, and they take precedence over all other business on the papers. In this case, they've been held over voluntarily by me since the last meeting. 2 of them are to deal with retrospective motions to deal with the bushfire disaster and the Yabun festival. So I'll refrain from speaking to any of the motions, but we're going to deal with them now, given they've already been held over for one meeting, and that's in keeping with the Code of Meeting Practice.
Well, Mayor, I think it would be respectful for the members of the public that are here this evening that we did deal with those items first, but if you want to proceed with your mayoral minutes, that's your course.
I'll be as quick as I can. We'll move to mayoral minute item 1, which is disaster relief funding for the RFS, which is on page 24 of today's business papers. As I said, I won't speak to the matter, except to say that I've provided an amendment to the minute takers to note that given the unprecedented nature of the national disaster, council officers have been able to identify the funds available for this through working capital, councillors will be aware that we resolved unanimously that we would establish a disaster relief fund in next year's budget, the upcoming budget, with a sum of $50,000 allocated to it. So we're just seeking to bring that decision forward, and that can be funded through working capital. And I think the minute takers have captured that as an amendment to the resolution. Is there anyone who wishes to speak to it? Councillor Porteous and then Councillor Passos.
Yeah, look, I'm glad that you have found the money because I was concerned about where the money was actually being identified from. I did ask a question to the General Manager and the Corporate Services Manager, which I didn't get a reply to, as to the assertion here that the 50,000 disaster relief charity funds was coming from the 2021 budget, because while I'm totally in support of this donation, I wanted to clarify if we are now able to anticipate funds from a budget that we haven't yet adopted, and which would appear to be the case, as this was the justification from where that funding was coming from. So as this had already been approved under delegation, I'd ask the General Manager to explain exactly where he identified those funds from, because obviously this is already money that's been donated. And as I said, I totally support that, and I would have sought to find it from some other source, but I was just surprised at the explanation in this Mayoral Minute.
Okay, well, I hope that we don't need to get political about donating money to the bushfire-affected communities, given it was a unanimous resolution of the council to do so, but I'll put that question to the Chief Executive.
Thank you, Councillor. I've been in court today, so I've been unable to respond earlier. The adjustments in the working capital, the cash flow, there's a normal procedure to find the money. We'll adjust the capital works as we come to the new budget. And so it's a normal process.
Thank you for that. Councillor Passos.
Just to clarify then, it wouldn't be normal process to identify funds from a budget that hasn't yet been adopted?
No.
Is that correct?
There's nothing normal about the bushfires, so.
Oh, that's not my question, Councillor. My question is what was actually in your Mayoral Minute, and I just want a clarification, if I could, through you as the Chair, to the General Manager.
Yeah, I think the question's been answered.
Question has not been answered.
What's the second question?
The question that I'm asking is, in your Mayoral Minute, this money has already been handed over, and it says...
It hasn't already been handed over, I don't believe.
Okay, well, that's the
Would you
implication.
prefer to defer it till June when we adopt the budget?
No, I just wanted a clarification as to, is that an acceptable process for identifying funds from the General Manager, as this is in the Mayoral Minute? That's all I want.
Put that question to the Chief Executive.
Yes, Councillor.
Councillor Passos.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. It says at the bottom of this Mayoral Minute that the cancellation of the event due to weather. Did we take out insurance for these events? Are we insured?
I'll put that question to the officers.
I'll take that on notice and get you an answer shortly, Councillor.
No, and I would also like some clarification. Like, I'm not against, we've sent people down to help in the fire ravaged areas. I would also like to know how much that has cost the council. Would that go in as sort of a donation too? And was it only 50,000, or do I recall you talking about another 50,000 coming from somewhere?
I'll put the first question to the Chief Executive about the cost of officers on secondment in fire-affected communities.
Councillor, we're keeping a separate cost code for all the services we're providing to councils, and we'll be able to report back on how much has been spent.
And just following up on Councillor Porteous's questions, I would be interested too to know how this money's found, because I remember I had to go to practically hell and back to have funding found for a pocket park. And all of a sudden we seem to bang, 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 find this money so easily, and we need really proper explanations where this money is and where it's coming from.
Okay, thank you for that. Are there any further contributions? Councillor Macri?
Chair, I'd just like to note in your recommendation, I don't know if it's an amendment, that I spoke to, had a conversation with the CEO about one of Maryville's former sister cities in Passchendaele, actually contacted us to donate to the actual bushfire relief, and I just think that really should go on record that, you know, that sister city relationship is strong. And I know Councillor Hesse actually went to Passchendaele to sign the agreement. So I think it should be publicly noted for the record that they contacted us to assist us.
Okay, thank you very much for that. If there's no further contributions, I'll just speak very briefly just to address some of the issues that have been raised. Firstly, in regards to Councillor Macquarie's point, I think it's really necessary that we have a further report come to council explaining all the excellent work that officers have been doing on secondment in bushfire affected communities, which I think deserves recognition. The officers of the council have put their hand up to be able to go and provide assistance. Hopefully we will be able to claim some of the cost of that back through the federal government's funding allocations, but I do think that's a secondary consideration. It's a good thing that this council and the officers who work within it have gone out to those communities and have been providing direct and practical assistance. And I do want to pay tribute to the Chief Executive for his role in coordinating that and reaching out to those communities. That's been a really positive thing. I understand Councillor Porteous and Councillor Passos wanting to ensure that our strict rule that we've adhered to about providing funding allocations for motions be stuck to and upheld. In this instance, I wrote to all councillors and indicated that given the unprecedented nature of the national disaster and the fact that almost every other metropolitan council had made this or a larger contribution, that rather than waiting till June to make the commitment as we'd resolved to do, that we should seek to bring that forward. The officers have identified that given those unprecedented circumstances that the funding can be reallocated from working capital, and I don't think that that's a problem. I also don't think that it sets a precedent for how motions on various policy priorities could be funded. So I'll put that. All those in favour, please raise your hands. All those against? That has been carried unanimously. The next Mayoral Minute is in relation to the Yabun Festival, similarly a decision taken under delegation. I will not speak to the matter directly, except to say that I've provided a similar amendment to the minute takers after consultation with the officers, that funds have been identified from existing city living budgets to provide the sponsorship for the 2020 event. Obviously, if council chooses to make a further ongoing commitment to the festival, then that will need to be identified in next year's budget. So I will move that way. Councillor Passos?
Yes, Mr Mayor, I think it's really, first of all, in your Mayoral Minute, you said following a resolution that we support. Yes, no one had a problem with that. There was no talk of any financial contribution. This is another council area. This is not, we had no celebration in our council area, and yet we give $30,000 to the city council, and this is a festival that was already funded. Now, it says here, following an official request. Well, there's no request attached to this Mayoral Minute. Where is the official request that this group asked for this money? And then we also had, I don't know how many councillors attended, and I think you might have a conflict because it was free, you got free tickets. So we're debating this, you should really, whoever councillors, excuse me.
I'll call the meeting to order. Councillor Passos, I'll ask you to address the motion at hand.
I was, and it was also, the email also stated that there'd be drinks later on at the hotel across the road. Who paid for the drinks? This council?
Councillors paid for themselves.
Sorry, I'm going to call the meeting to order. Councillor Passos, I've asked you once. I'll ask you to address the motion. If you have questions about propriety, there's methods for raising that, but it's not during this debate.
Excuse me, Mr Mayor, it is during this debate. This is the issue. First of all, I don't know where you had the delegated authority to pledge or give $30,000. I don't recall any resolution that you had delegated authority to do this. We do not have an official request from the organisation that they wanted this money. Now, Mr Mayor, if you want to campaign with ratepayers' money, it's just not on. No other councillor has the opportunity.
I would ask that Councillor Passos withdraw that statement. She's making an imputation about your motivation for donating the funds.
Call the meeting to order. Call the meeting to order.
It's not an imputation.
I'll call the meeting to order.
This was not a
I'll
council.
call the meeting to order. As we all know, I've got a very thick skin, so I'm going to allow that as political rhetoric. Please proceed.
This was not a council resolution. We denied our ratepayers of a celebration in the inner west, no Australia Day celebration. We have had all the events in Ashfield thrown out. We're left with 2, and yet we're donating ratepayers' money to the city of Sydney that spends millions on fireworks, and this Yabun Festival is being funded by the City of City Council. Mr Mayor, I'm sorry, you just sort of going around throwing away ratepayers' money like that is just not on. We are here to be accountable. And I think it's totally wrong that our residents missed out, but we're giving their rates to another municipality. And I'm voting against this. I don't have a problem with us advertising, telling our residents if they want to attend Yabun Festival, well and good. But we don't have to also give them funding.
Thank you for that. Further discussion, councillors? I'll address some of Councillor Pass's points in my right of reply. Councillor Hesse?
Thanks, Chair. I don't want to sound curmudgeonly, but I'll start off with the process bit. I think this is actually an indication, indeed all these mayoral minutes this evening are an indication of why they should be they should be officers' reports, not mayoral minutes. I don't see any of them as urgent per se, but I think that's a different matter, but I think that's important to put on the record.
Right.
Other than that, I do think that this is a good sponsorship for council to be engaged with. I certainly attended the event along with many, many thousands of others, many other, I guess, tens of thousands of Sydney-siders on the day. I attended the public bits. I didn't go to anywhere where it cost a zack for anyone to do anything. And I ran into a hell of a lot of residents of the inner west and lots of other people from goodness knows where. I'd ran into an old friend of mine who lives at Epping these days. People came from across the city in a genuine celebration, not just of Aboriginal survival and thriving in this city, but indeed of the multicultural society that Sydney is. So in that sense, I
call the meeting to order. Councillor Hesse has the floor. Councillor Hesse, please proceed.
And so I think in that sense, it was a great event as it's been growing over the last, it's 32 years since I've been going to these events, and they've grown every year and got better. And I think this is the city that I think many of us want to see. And in fact, by their attendance, many people demonstrating that they want to see. I think it certainly outstrips any of the January 26 events I've been to with the former Marrickville and indeed in the West Council, and that's not a criticism in any way, shape or form of the staff who put on great events. But I think it's the response of the community which really sets this apart. And I think it's one of those things where I think it was a late decision, but I think it's one of those things where we can do better and engage more with our community about this important issue. I certainly support it. Thank you.
Councillor Stamos.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We took a very difficult decision about Australia Day in the Inner West community, and that decision was we would have no event for our people here in the Inner West. We took a very clear decision that we no event at all. And in fact, what we said is we encourage people to go to the Yabun Festival, and I've spoken with some of the organisers of the Yabun Festival who have said to me it's very well funded, has been going for 20 years. And then during the intervening period when councillors were off on leave, I found that we became, not only were we supporting our residents to go to Yabun, which all councillors did, most councillors voted for that, I certainly did, but then we became a major sponsor, $30,000. Furthermore, we received an email saying the first 10 councillors in get 10 free tickets to the event. Look, saying to my community, you've got no event, and for me to accept a ticket, one of those 10 free tickets, it is morally wrong. I couldn't think of that. I want to know how it happened that we became a major sponsor. I want to know what these 10 free tickets were all about. And also, Mr Mayor, I would be putting a notice of motion forward at the next meeting. We are a big council. I am sure that we have capable and effective events management staff who can organise the appropriate the appropriate event for the people in our own community. And I spoke to this organiser of Yabun. They were certainly involved in the original organiser. They said Inner West could do it, no problem at all. So my notice of motion that will appear before council next month is, we are a big council. Let's behave like one. Let's run our Yabun event. We all have an appropriate attitude to how this could be done, how it could be done very sensitively, purposefully, and involving our Aboriginal community in this, so that it reflects the values of the Inner West community. So let's do that, councillors. We don't have to, I believe that if these funds are available, these $30,000 are available, that's a fantastic start from what I'm told for our own appropriate Australia Day event, focusing on the Aboriginal people, which I'm sure that our community wants. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any further contributions? If not, I'll make a very brief right of reply. Just to outline for council, I'll actually read directly from the email that I sent on the 20th of January, in which the Chief Executive was copied in. Following our resolution last year to promote attendance at the Yabun Festival by local citizens, myself and the CEO met with the board of Koori Radio, which auspices the festival, in late December, to discuss how council can support the event. Following an official request, I'm making use of delegated authority to approve a contribution from council of $30,000 to sponsor the event. I've copied in the CEO, who can provide further information about the components of the festival the sponsorship will support. And I foreshadowed that I would bring a motion to council to endorse this. I don't think I received a single email of complaint or objection. I received a number of emails of support. Everyone who's served on council over time knows that during the recess period, there are occasions when mayors are required, with officers' consultation and consultation with councillors, to use delegated authority. In this case, it was one that no one objected to. I might say that was also the case with the bushfires relief contribution. No one sent me an email saying they had any objection to it at all. It's not that it's a City of Sydney event. It's an event that's run by the Aboriginal community, which the City of Sydney contributes to. So certainly the advice that I received from the organisers was that they agreed with our in-principle position that we shouldn't be running a competing event with Yabun, that our way of showing respect and solidarity on that day was to support the existing illustrious event through an Inner West contribution. And like Councillor Hesse, I did see a lot of our local residents there on the day. In relation to no events being held on the 26th of January, that's simply not the case. As everyone who attended the citizenship ceremony would know, we held a very well attended, very well respected, very sensitive and thoughtful ceremony. That the feedback I had from local citizens who participated and the new citizens was that they thought it was a terrific way for the council to conduct itself on the 26th of January. I invite all councillors who haven't had a chance yet in this term to attend a citizenship ceremony. We do them once a month. I did one last Wednesday at Ashfield Town Hall, and any councillor who wants to come along and participate in those events, that'd be great. But let's not pretend they don't occur. They're actually a really important part of what we do.
Please, Mr. Mayor, please, you protest too much.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll now put the motion. All those in favour? All those against? That has been carried with Councillors Macri and Passis against. And Stamoulis. Next item, Birchgrove and Balmain ferries changing. Again, I'll withhold my right to speak. Councillors will be aware that there have been proposals from Transdev by proxy for the New South Wales Government to alter the running of ferry services in Balmain. The impacts of that are outlined in the background to the motion, which I'll now table. Is there anyone who wishes to speak to it? Councillor Porteous.
Yeah, look, I just wanted to get a clarification as to what council has done with regard to making a submission. I note that submissions have actually closed now, so some of the motion might need to be amended. But I noticed the General Manager has left the room. I'm not sure if somebody else can respond to that. I'm hoping that at least we have made a submission, but is there other things we've done? Have we informed local residents? What sort of actions have we taken is my question.
Well, I'll put that question to the officers, which might need to be taken on notice until the appropriate person is here. Liz, are you? Yeah. Okay, so we'll take that on notice momentarily. I did meet with a representative from Transdev last week, which was the day before the closure of submissions from the public, and won an agreement from him that any submissions that were made by council subsequent to the closure of that date would still be assessed. So I think the public portal is now closed, but if we resolve to make a submission tonight, we can do so and make sure that it is part of the public consultation process.
Okay. I guess the point I was going to make is that it does concern me that this would make a really major impact on a lot of residents on the Balmain Peninsula, and it would be good if we could perhaps do a little bit more in terms of raising some of the issues, some of the real transport issues that could eventuate if this were to happen, and some of the impacts on people's lives, personal impacts on their lives. So I was going to ask if we could add that we run a survey as well through council to our residents on the Balmain Peninsula as to what those impacts are going to be if this goes ahead, and we provide the results of that survey to the Transdev and to the Minister for Transport, and possibly use it from a campaigning perspective as well.
I'm certainly happy to consider that. I would ask that you provide the wording to the minute taker and form it in such a way so that it doesn't inherently involve a substantial cost to council. So we've got lots of engagement mechanisms that we can drive it out through. But if you can just provide that wording to the minute taker, that would be great. Further discussion, councillors? Councillor De Cruz. No? Okay. Well, there's no further discussion. I'll just wait for Councillor Porteous to be able to provide that wording to the minute taker so that it can be incorporated. Yep, come back to it, no problem. Okay, the next item is Mayoral Minute 4, the penultimate one, which is in relation to the Rozelle Interchange. Now, I have actually made a minor amendment to this, which I understand officers circulated earlier today. In essence, certainly the Balmain ward councillors, but any of the elected representatives who've been travelling through Lilyfield and Rozelle in particular since about September last year will know about the horrendous traffic and parking impacts that have occurred since the opening of WestConnex Stage 1, combined with the beginning of construction works at the Rozelle Goods Yard, which has created something of a perfect storm, which is going to worsen over time. And Council, of course, has been making clear to the government for a very long period of time that there would be this impact when Stage 1 opened concurrently with construction works beginning at the Rozelle Goods Yard. And officers and councillors have made submissions to the government. In fact, we've submitted a very good $30 million local traffic plan that would ameliorate many of the impacts on local roads of WestConnex, which the government has simply refused to respond to. Council was very clear from the start that with the enormous number of workers coming on site for this project, that local roads and streets were simply not going to be able to cope, and that there would be a great loss in resident parking. And unsurprisingly, that's precisely what has occurred. Now, the council officers took it upon themselves in the first instance to go and survey the whole area around King George Park, right when the workers started parking there. And unfortunately, because resident parking schemes have very high warrants and are complicated to implement, and they're never unanimously supported by local residents in any given street, unsurprisingly, a lot of residents had concerns that that wouldn't actually solve the problem, that the central problem was several hundred new people without on-site parking being in and around their homes every day, and not a single new residents parking scheme was supported by a substantial enough number of residents for it to be implemented following that consultation. Subsequently, Transport for New South Wales have said that they'll fund $180,000 worth of investigations in areas affected by the construction of the Rozelle Interchange and King George Park. And I'm saying that we should thank them for that, note that we've been advocating for that, and ask them to expedite the matter and get the studies done and reported to the Traffic Committee. I don't think it becomes Councillor Macri or Councillor De Cruz's responsibility to make those residents' parking schemes work when we've told them all along that that's going to be insufficient to deal with the Southern Hemisphere's largest motorway interchange, which you're building in a dense residential community. So we should also restate that we managed to win 350 car parking spaces. We need at least double that on site in White Bay or in the Rozelle goods yard itself. And so I'm suggesting that we write off to Transport for New South Wales and step up our advocacy on that. I won't speak to it any further, but I'm happy to address any questions that councillors might have in my right of reply. Councillors. Councillor De Cruz.
I noticed that there's comments about compliance breaches of 3A and 3B, and certainly I feel that there are a lot of those because there's trucks travelling all over the west, all over the inner west on minor roads. So that's a really good thing to for the compliance, and whether we can continue to have. I can't see all the points, but I think there's one further down about compliance and assisting residents to report issues. The other issue that I think we do need to include in here is the removal of the bridge over Victoria Road, the cycling and pedestrian bridge, and that no safe alternative has been provided for that.
Yep. I'm certainly happy to consider incorporating that, councillor, if you'd like to provide the wording to the minute taker. Further discussion? Councillor Macri.
Chair, I'm generally supportive of your motion. I'm just not sure if handing over to the roads people to actually do the consultation with the residents. We've already done a significant area up there, the King George area, and the residents actually rejected the residents' parking.
Yeah.
Generally, if people own more than one car and they're parking out on the streets, they will generally resist. So if they do it, we're still going to get the blame for it. I think at least if we do it, we can say, well, okay, we asked you and you said no. But if it comes back to, I didn't get notification, I wasn't told because I don't do it as well as our staff do it, that might open us up for a little bit of criticism from the residents. That's the only thing I'm concerned about. The rest of it, I'm quite happy with. But if you're happy to leave that, I'll support it.
Yep. Okay, any further discussion? Councillor Stamoulis?
Mayor, in terms of item point 6 of that, of your Mayoral Minute, design a flyer to be made available to residents outlining how they can lodge complaints. Is this something that we're going to provide in letterboxes or at the council admin centres, or what's your intent there?
I'm proposing that the council officers just draft something up which could be provided to residents when they complain, rather than us expending funds on a generalised letterbox. Okay. So within the council's communications unit. Councillor Lockie.
Yeah, I just wanted to address the comments that Councillor Macri made, and I want to acknowledge that as chair of the traffic committee, you have a lot of expertise in this area. I would ask Councillor Byrne to keep that point in the motion. I think we're speaking to a lot of the same people who are very upset about the impacts on parking, who are frustrated to see the schemes that we've tried to canvass on be rejected because they're not meeting those thresholds. So I think we do have to explore those other solutions. I would also like to take a moment to recognise the vast amount of community advocacy that continues to be done on this project by community groups such as Leichhardt Against WestConnex, who have been pushing for a lot of these outcomes, both with council officers and in the various community reference groups. They do that of their own bat, in their own time, for absolutely no compensation or salary and so forth. So I think it's important to recognise that a lot of the reason we're able to fight these battles is because we have strong community members fighting them alongside us.
Yeah, look, I'm extremely concerned about this because it's really impacting very significantly on people's lives, and it's been distressing, and it's been distressing for a long time for people in these areas where we've got the construction work happening. I do think that one thing we could be looking at, I mean, obviously we want to be trying to get a resident parking scheme established as soon as possible. Just as a question through the chair to the General Manager, whether some of these vehicles are heavy vehicles or are they all just regular cars that are taking away the parking spots of. So I'd imagine there'd be quite a lot of trucks as well. Workers' vehicles. So they're not trucks. Oh, okay. Okay, that's not so great then. Look, I do think as well that it needs advocacy at the highest level, because I think that the staff have often really just been being ignored to a certain extent. While there's money that's been put on the table, the reality is that there haven't been the solutions there that should be there to actually improve the situation, and people are daily feeling the impacts of this, and it's extremely distressing for them. And I would like to see perhaps that there's a meeting that's arranged at a high level with the Mayor and the General Manager, preferably with the Minister and other appropriates that is really taking a very serious look at what's happening here. So I'd ask that the Mayor add that as a further amendment.
Okay, well, just to address a couple of the issues, certainly happy to request a meeting with Minister Constance when he's returned, or whoever's acting in his role. There's not a very good record of Andrew Constance agreeing to meetings with representatives from the Inner West Council, but we should request it. I did attend a public forum last night with the Deputy Secretary of the Department of Transport, and it was made very clear to her by myself and everybody else in the room that the impacts at the moment are atrocious, and that the parking and traffic situation is just chaotic. So I agree we have to keep the pressure up on that. In relation to who undertakes the residence parking scheme investigations, officers have informed me that we don't have the capacity to do it, that we'd be outsourcing it. Let's just be blunt about this. What the Department of Transport is trying to do is give the Inner West Council and the community a hospital pass. They've created a completely unlivable parking situation, and then they're going, oh, by the way, here's 180 grand for residence parking scheme investigations that won't address the problem. But hopefully what it will do is get the community and the council squabbling with each other and disagreeing with each other, when what we actually need is 700 car parking spaces provided on site by the government, and they could do it tomorrow. They could do it tomorrow with, it would be very easy. There's a huge amount of land down there, including under the other side of the precinct. And so let's not fall into the trap of owning their problem. Let's stand up and fight for the community for the actual solution, which is on-site parking for the workers, which also results in them not getting fined. So that's the reason that I've phrased it in that way. And Councillor Macri, I respect your view greatly, and that's why I've referred to the fact that we want this to be reported to the Traffic Committee in April. And if they've got solutions that can work, we know that we've got someone in you as chair who will implement them, and the council can become engaged in it at that time. So I'll now move that way. All those in favour? All those against? That has been carried unanimously. The last Mayoral Minute is just really a congratulatory one, thanking the officers for the very large piece of work that they have undertaken over many months now since the amalgamation to integrate our property and rating system. So I'm moving that council thank and congratulates the dedicated team of more than 30 council staff, led by our Chief Operating Officer, Liz Richardson, who's here tonight, but also our Chief Information Officer, Harin Pereira, and the Project Manager, Steve Johnson, who have worked tirelessly to deliver this state-of-the-art technology to the Inner West. Councillors will all be aware that whilst this is not the sexiest piece of public policy, it's the sort of thing that will actually make a huge difference over time to the efficiency of services. Having residents being able to access information and pay bills online for the first time will actually make a big difference. So I will move that way. Councillor Drury.
Thank you, Mayor, for bringing this forward. And I too would like to heartily congratulate the staff who have achieved this major milestone. This is a milestone that none of the former councils were able to do. To bring together property and ratings is one of the holy grails of local government. To actually be able to have one single system that links all the rating information, all the property information, is a major advantage to all of our residents. We will see the benefits of this roll out in terms of the ways indicated in this report, greater access for residents to be able to interact with council. There'll be greater certainty and less mistakes in terms of DAs and things like that. We have made a huge step forward. And it's a huge step forward that very few other councils have made. And I believe we may, in fact, be one of the first to actually make this in terms of the cloud. And we should be very proud of this. This is a moment in the Inner West Council where we can, in fact, step forward based on a lot of hard work by a lot of people over a significant period of time. We should be heartily thanking them, and I look forward to seeing the benefits of this system roll out over the years.
Thank you for that. Councillor Passos?
Well, I'm not aware of this system. You know, I don't use technology too much, but from what I've just heard here tonight, yeah, the staff should be thanked, but this is a matter of covered in diamonds and have no shoes. I have residents that have tried. One resident that her husband passed away has tried to get a copy of the rates to know how much he has to pay. Her husband used to look after all that. It was in his name. He used to look after all the bills, and she's been trying since he died 3.5 months ago. She's been up to the counter at least half a dozen times to no avail. She approached me 2 days ago. Now, the next thing, residents who pay online do not receive the notifications or flyers or information that residents receive in the hard copy rate notice that's sent to their home. So I don't know if it's online and when they pay their rates, but they are missing out on information that other residents are receiving. If I could have an explanation on that, on how that works, so I can tell these people, well, if you want that flyer or that information, because I recall that the former Ashfield councils, when they sent out the rate notices, they also sent out free family passes for residents to the swimming pool. So how are we going to get around that? Thank you. If I can have some answers, I'd appreciate it.
Notice that can be addressed. Further discussion? Councillor De Cruz, then Councillor Stamos. Okay, I'll come back to that.
So could I just confirm that this is the system that really puts all the DAs from Ashfield and Marrickville online like they were at Leichhardt? Through the chair?
I'll put that question to the Chief Operating Officer.
Through the chair, councillors, yes, with the commencement of the new property and rating system comes an expanded online application tracking system as well.
Okay, thank you.
That Councillor
Then-
Stamos?
Sorry, I might say a few words.
Yep.
Then in that case, congratulations to the officers, because I was sceptical and thought this project would be a complete blowout and end in tears and court cases. We haven't had a report of whether it's come in on budget or on time, but we have achieved it, and I haven't heard anything to the contrary. So congratulations, I'd like to add that too.
Excellent, well done. Councillor Stamos.
Also, I'd like to say well done to the staff for this. It's a major project. It did take 4 years to do. In 3 months' time, we would have finished the first 4 years of our merger. So it's a pretty lengthy old time to implement the system. But that's good, very good. I'm not sure I'm of the same frame of mind as Councillor Drury that this system's going to bring freshly baked bread to all our houses from now on. I think that each morning. But look, it's a step in the right direction for our council in ensuring that we have better technology to serve our public. The next thing, we need to use that to actually serve our public. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stamos. Did you want an update on whether it will be able to implement the banners policy that you've pioneered this term?
I'll bake bread first, thanks.
Okay, Councillor Macri.
Chair, I'm not quite sure how this is going to work out, but basically I tried to use the online system to look at a DA and I wasn't able to achieve that. And I'm not sure if it's because of the iPad. It couldn't I think we have to let people know if there is a certain requirement of computer you need to actually access and interact with the system. It took me to the point, but then it just couldn't find the files. So it might need a little bit of investigation on that part.
Well, I think one useful thing would be for councillors to be briefed at an upcoming briefing session about how they can make use of the system. Of course, everyone did receive the memo on the day that the system came online, so we've all had that information for an extended period of time, but I'm happy to incorporate that request for a briefing for councillors and a demonstration. Councillor Porteous.
Yeah, just as well as a briefing, I think it would be appropriate to also have a report come to council which outlines the work that's been done, the time that's been that was undertaken, and also the costs of the work, if that could be incorporated into the Mayoral Minute as well.
Happy to incorporate that as well. It's a success story, so it's important that councillors are made aware of that, and of course the memo that's already been provided provides the substance of that report. So we'll incorporate both of those amendments, a briefing and demonstration of the new system for councillors and a further report to come to council summarising the project implementation. Is there any further discussion? If not, I'll just wait for the minute takers to capture that. Thank you very much for working on the run.
Can we just have the additional?
To your procedural motion, Councillor Porteous.
Suspend standing orders and bring forward items 6, 7, 10 and 14, which are the items that people have spoken to this
Is there a
evening.
seconder for that? Seconded by Councillor Hesse. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Item 6. Councillor De Cruz would like to move adoption of item 6.
No,
Up to you.
I'd like to move an alternate motion, which I've sent to Catherine, to defer this item pending a briefing. There were lots of issues raised today by residents, and we've also not had a briefing on what is a very complex document, so I move that way.
Councillor, is there a seconder for that? Seconded by Councillor Catt. Do you wish to speak to it?
Briefly, yes. I want to thank Mark Skelsey and the many people, Joe Blackman from Dulwich Hill as well. And I note that, of the many comments to the housing strategy, I think a majority were from one suburb of Dulwich Hill. They're useful. As was alluded to in their comments, it's a highly technical document. I believe the housing strategy is around 170 pages. It deals with a lot of important issues in relation to housing affordability, which I'll come back to, but in relation to, site-specific investigations, in relation to constraints analysis around future development, I think that we would probably benefit from an understanding of how that analysis was undertaken and trying to understand the implications. I think some very technical comments were raised by Mr. Skelsey in relation to the biodiversity corridor and why it was dealt with differently in different areas. I have to say, I don't think I yet have a clear understanding of that, and so on that basis, I'd really appreciate the assistance of the staff in understanding that further. I would say that overall it seems like a very hefty piece of work, and I want to thank the staff for their work on that and on the transport strategy. In relation to what the housing strategy says about affordable housing, I would encourage all councillors to have a very close read of section 4 of the strategy. The conclusion in that section is that to meet what it calls the affordable housing gap, that is the lack of housing that we have to meet the needs of those who are homeless and those who are in housing stress, we need to contribute an additional 471 affordable or social dwellings per year. That's 57% of total approvals that are projected over the next 10 years. That's a huge task. More than half of the housings that, of the dwellings that are approved need to meet either be affordable housing or social housing. Now, the Section 4 sets out a number of strategies, both planning mechanisms and non-planning mechanisms to meet that goal, that target. But ultimately, it's going to be something that we'll need to keep coming back to in the LEP project and elsewhere. So I'll just flag now that when we do deal with this substantively, I'd like to see us as a council dealing with that challenge as a priority.
Thank you for that. I've got Councillor McKenna.
Can I just say something quickly, Chair? I thought this actual strategy had to be put in by March, so there's no meetings before now and then.
I'll come back to you about that. Councillor McKenna.
That was the first thing I was going to ask the question. Is this time constrained, this report? Does it need to go in with the LSPS?
I'll put that question to the officers.
Next Monday?
Through the Chair, Councillors, technically not. Technically, the LSPS can be sent to the Department of Planning in the absence of the housing strategies. Where we may run into complications if Council substantially deviates off the existing housing strategy that you've got before you, that may cause difficulties for the LSPS.
Well, and there may also be a motion for deferral of the LSPS as well, given the tone in the room. Councillor McKenna?
What's the sort of a motion we're going to move?
Well, can I just ask?
I'd like to move the motion as printed on the.
I'll call the meeting to order. Councillor McKenna has the floor. Councillor McKenna has the floor. I'm calling the meeting to order. I'll call the meeting to order. Councillor Porteous, I'll ask you to desist from interjecting against Councillor McKenna, who hasn't yet had a chance to speak to the matter at all.
This strategy is just that. It's a strategy. It's not a Bible. It's not absolutely set in concrete. So there are many issues in here which can be altered. They will be altered. They won't turn out exactly how they are in this document. I was under the impression that they were time constrained and we would need to send them off with the LSPS. As you've just heard, we can't make large deviations. There are issues, just addressed by Councillor Kiat, in relation to the affordable housing. We're not affordable housing providers. We're able to help a little, but we can't do that. We can't ever provide the sort of affordable housing to fix the homelessness situation alone. That's not something that the council can do, and we really do want to do what we can, but we cannot fix that alone. So I would probably don't have the numbers. I'm not quite sure what's going on here, but I do think we need to put up amendments if you have such amendments, but I think we really should be trying to see this over the line with whatever amendments we are needed. But at this point, I'd like to move the officer's recommendation as a
foreshadowed motion.
Foreshadowed, thank you.
Is there a seconder for that? Seconded by Councillor York. Do you wish to speak to it? Can I just ask one follow-up question before I come? It's related to what Councillor Macri was about to raise. So there's potentially, theoretically, the LSPS could be submitted without the housing strategy and the transport strategy, but would there be consequences if no local strategic planning statement was submitted by council at this time? Okay. Can I put that as a question to the officers and get an explanation?
The consequences are that potentially the Greater Sydney Commission will actually mandate the LSPS on our behalf.
Right. And write it themselves?
Potentially taking an earlier version or some version of the document that they've seen previously.
Okay. And are there funding implications as well?
Not tied to this, no.
Okay. Thank you for that. Councillor Lockie.
Okay, so I would like to say that whatever motion we put through, I do believe the transport strategy should go through tonight. I think that strategy has moved on considerably from what the early drafts that we saw. I have not had any pushback or feedback from the community in regards to that, and I think the kinds of principles that are in that are all ones that we've broadly discussed and agreed to in many different forms and fashions in this chamber. I guess the one I've got the questions about is the housing strategy, because we've heard tonight from a lot of different community members with some, very different elements of feedback. I don't know how well the officers are going to do this, but if I can put a question through the chair, in broad terms, some of that feedback we received in relation particularly to, well, I think they fell into a number of categories. So one was Carrington Road, one was Dulwich Hill and Arlington, and I think the other one was on the feedback from our housing committee. I hope I haven't missed anything. But if we can get some feedback as to how incorporating those might alter the strategy, and whether, if we deferred that so that we could consider those points in more detail, whether that would impact the LSPS considerably.
Okay, I'll put that question to the officers.
Through the chair. So the three, I guess, key submitters that you heard from tonight regarding the status of Dulwich Hill, regarding Carrington Road, and regarding the housing affordability issues. I wouldn't see any of those amendments that the council would potentially come as a result of trying to address those concerns to be significant. I think they're all potentially fairly minor amendments to the strategy itself.
What about the Carrington Road one? That seemed like it could be quite significant, or could we frame that in a way where we, because I don't know that I've met with those people before, and I know that they know I feel very strongly about protecting those industrial uses. I do see their point about the issues that are existing on site at the moment. Is there going to be a way we can move forward with that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry about that. I'll put that
Through the chair.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. The Carrington Road one, as it stands with the housing strategy, is potentially the one that's the most complicated. As it stands, the Carrington Road situation with regards to the LSPS is largely silent on Carrington Road, nominates it and retains it as industrial lands. Obviously, staff are continuing to have discussions with the proponents at Carrington Road, and we'll continue to work through that to try to arrive at an acceptable outcome. That said, the Greater Sydney Commission have been consistent, and they have been clear in their advice to council about the retention of those industrial lands, and we may be on a collision course there if we seek to deviate off that too much.
Thank you for that. Further discussion.
Can I just make a couple of comments? Look, I don't mind. I don't know how we resolve this. As I said, I would like to see the transport study go through today. I don't mind if we defer. I'm happy to support a deferral of the housing strategy to incorporate those kinds of comments and make sure we can balance that, but I would want to see that come back to the next meeting. I don't want to see any big delays, particularly if we think we can resolve that in quite a minor fashion. So I would ask Councillors De Cruz and Councillor Kiat if they would do that.
That's dependent upon there being a briefing between now and the next meeting.
Yeah.
Right, now, Councillor.
I just had a question, because if you actually have a look at the motion I've put forward, it actually includes employment and retail land strategies as well, which I don't believe those strategies have come to council.
Call the meeting to order. Councillor De Cruz has the floor.
And the point I'm making is I actually read through the housing strategy, and I noticed there's quite a bit of transport that was put in there. And that my concern is that the three are interrelated and all influence the LSPS. So we've heard today how the industrial lands are interconnecting with the housing lands, and these are employment lands. And further than that, we've also heard about how the transport integrates with the housing along the Greenway. So my proposal was that we actually get a briefing on all three strategies, and based on those strategies, it informs the LSPS. So I think the Mayor was right in saying that I was seeking a deferral on that. So the question I'm asking is, with the LSPS, what is the deadline for the submission?
I'll put that question to the officers.
That deadline's tomorrow, councillors.
Thank you for that. Councillor Passos.
I really feel for the residents in any issue that comes to council leading up to September, because there'll be a lot of games played looking for votes for the councillors that are planning on standing again. All very concerned. We did ask for an extraordinary meeting, I think 3 councillors, so we could finish off the agenda, and all we seem to have in front of us now is time restraints. Hurry up and make up your mind. We have to have it in by Monday, we have to have it in by Tuesday, or we have to have it in by Wednesday. If the extraordinary meeting was called, that councillors called for, we would have time to discuss this in the proper manner and maybe have a briefing. But you can't try to hold things up now. You reap what you sow. And councillors should be mindful. There's people sitting in that gallery that have concerns, valid concerns, and we should not be playing politics with their concerns. When you're raising things in council, don't raise them because you think you might attract a few votes. Because let me tell you, there but for the grace of God, you mightn't wake up tomorrow morning. So do what you believe is right and don't play around with issues, people's lives. And as I said, if we had the extraordinary meeting, we could have finished off this agenda.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Macri.
Thanks, Chair. I think the LSP has to go. The supporting documents really need to go with it, because you present the department a cake, you can't then present them the recipe that doesn't make the cake. My concerns are, if we have any concerns, we should be making them now, any fine amendments, because it's too late in the process to try and restructure this whole process. The process, I believe we should have had a briefing, but that was a long time ago. It should have been before this should have really hit here. That's what I believe, on our desks. This is a high-level document. The document that will really impact the residents is the LEP and the DCP, because that's going to be the fine grain down to the controls. This is an overarching statement. It is not the actual complete down to fine grain, down to street, down to the issues. That leads a lot more detailed work, and it's going to leave opportunities for residents to come forward, as one of the speakers came forward and spoke about preserving. Another speaker spoke about getting certainty and increasing the density from a group of residents in an area as well. So we have the opportunity then to engage with the community in that process. Personally, I believe the wording on Carrington Road is too strong. I believe potentially if we're going to do something about the issues down there, and I came home on that rainy Sunday, my ceiling had collapsed in my lounge room. I was up a ladder with a Gyprock saw cutting down the broken off ceiling, and Mr. Hambelides called me, virtually distraught, and asked me to come down and just see what's happening. Not to him personally, to the people that were trying to pump and bail the water out of their factories. I saw the work that he had done down there. He's done everything he can. Without major infrastructure work, that land will not be usable. It is important to note, if we want high functioning order of land, and land is very important in this LGA, we have to get it right, and something has to happen down there. I'm not saying what it's going to be, but something has to happen. Unless we move towards that, we're not going to fix that problem down there. And it wasn't Mr. Hambelides that I was worried about, it was all his tenants that are going broke and then pumping the water out. And you can imagine these doors, as in a ship, at the garage doors are about this high, and the pumps were pumping the water out. And I said to him, Harry, but they're pumping the water out, and it's going to come back in. He said, Vic, we've got to try and keep it under a foot in the factory. People are trying to pick up stock and pick it up. Stuff was destroyed everywhere. I've got photos if people want to see them, stuff like that. That's my real concern. And the other stuff, the other residents mentioned, can be dealt with in the fine-grained tuning of the LEP and the DCPs. That's what I'll say now. And as far as the transport strategy is concerned, I'll just note that it says there's an uplift in 120% in ferries, 10% in walking, 84% in bikes. It says there's also increase in cars. It doesn't say how many increase in cars. But an interesting fact is there's a take-up of over 300% increase in electric vehicle purchases. So I don't think the motor car's dead and buried just yet.
Yeah, look, I know I often focus on process, but process actually is what makes good governance and actually enables a good democratic process, a good democratic institution to work properly for the benefit of the residents. And I really feel that we're letting down our residents, our community, by not having good process here. It's really not acceptable that councillors haven't had a full and thorough briefing on both the transport strategy and the housing strategy, and that we're being basically held with a gun to our heads, being told that we have to pass these, even though we clearly feel that there's further amendments that are required, and there's concerns that have been raised that we want to be able to address. And I think that, you know, we need to have a way of not doing this at the last moment. There seems to be, over and over again, we're finding that we're getting...
Distracting the chamber from Councillor Poyetz, who's trying to address the chamber.
I'm happy for her to distract. That's totally fine by me. It's for the benefit of the wider good. But the point is that, you know, we need to have it structured so that we actually get these briefings in a timely fashion, so that that when they come to council can then pass them. Not, you know, at the last minute, you've got to pass it now, otherwise, you know, gun to the head.
Okay, I'm just going to call you to order there, councillor. I'm just going to make one comment. It's been articulated that we had a lot of held over business from the previous meeting. That's certainly not the fault of the officers.
And this is not...
No, accept that.
Sorry.
No, I'm sorry, I'm calling you to order, Councillor Porteous, because you've just described councillors as having a gun held to their head twice in your speech by the officers. I'm just going to ask you just to step back and direct your comments in the political realm rather than towards the staff. Please proceed.
My point is the timeliness of the work that's being done, and us being able to have those strategic conversations, so that they're not landed on us at the last minute. Because at the moment we are finding this is a pattern that's happening, and it continues to happen. It's not a one-off, and I understand the pressure that the staff are under, and I totally respect the good work that the staff do, but we're not getting the kind of briefings that we should be getting. I don't understand, for example, why on Tuesday of next week, for example, we don't have a briefing. Why couldn't this have gone to that Tuesday for a briefing, and it be brought to the first March meeting? I mean, there's things that I feel could be addressed in a way that we're actually getting a much more timely response to these really important documents, so that we're able to properly consider them and we're able to get the information we want before they come to council. So I'm just making that comment that I think the process needs to be addressed. It can be improved. Apologies for the comment about the gun to the head. I just said it 3 times now, but I guess it's that sort of instinctive feeling of we're not being provided with alternatives that we feel that we need to have in order to be able to do a good job as councillors. So I'll just conclude by saying, if we could address that with future strategies. I think it's possible for us to defer both of these strategies and still stay within the parameters that's been outlined by the staff, and I would encourage us to do that this evening.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor York.
A little bit frustrated. We've had a series of briefings on the 3 matters in this item. We've also had them circulated as memos to councillors for input in various iterations. They've also been on public exhibition. So to argue that the wheels of democracy are not turning in the council because you have not had 85 briefings on this matter, I think is misleading and inappropriate. However, I think it is not fair for the habit of some people in this chamber to try to complicate and defer everything that comes to the chamber to impact on the residents who have brought reasonable concerns that the staff have advised could be reasonably easily, potentially, addressed. So, I would prefer that we try as a group to address those concerns on the basis of the staff advice, but I cannot, in good faith, agree to a deferral as is worded that suggests that at least 3 other documents be prepared before we can even consider this. That is patently absurd. So instead, what I would propose is that we defer this item until the end of tonight's agenda and we ask the staff to do their best to draft some simple amendments that address some of the issues that have been raised tonight, and we try to come back and reconvene and look at it again this evening. It's either that or you throw the baby out with the bathwater, and I would rather that we gave ourselves and the residents that have come tonight a chance to have a look and see if we can resolve it now than defer it indefinitely. So that's my proposal.
Okay, thank you. I think that's very sensible, and I do want to reiterate some of Councillor York's comments. It's been a very long process in which councillors have been briefed right throughout the last 12 or 18 months and regularly received documentation and offers of collaboration and discussion from officers. I don't think it's a fair depiction to suggest that this is something that's been lumped on council at the last minute. It's been a very detailed process with timelines imposed by the New South Wales government, but it's basically the whole of this term that we've been discussing this in closed briefing sessions. Councillor McKenna.
I'm happy to withdraw my proposed foreshadowed motion in favour of Councillor York's. If that's, can I do that?
Yep, thank you. So we've got an amended foreshadowed motion. Councillor Hesse.
My question through you to the officers is, what time is our meeting limit tonight?
11.
I'm not trying to be nasty at all.
I'll put that question to the Chief Executive.
Councillor, we believe the amendments are relatively minor. We can do it within the next hour and come back to you by about 9:30.
Well, it sounds like a sensible way forward. Can we give that a crack? Councillor De Cruz, can you agree to that? Yeah. Okay. So that becomes the De Cruz-York motion for deferral of the matter until 9:30, and I'll keep an eye on the clock and I'll ask interested parties to liaise with the officers who are going to work diligently. I'll put that. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously. That's all right. They've come along and now they'll have an opportunity to discuss it. Councillor Drury.
Mayor, may I move the item 7, the draft local strategic planning statement? I've read through that statement really carefully, and I note that it is a statement of high-level aspiration for our community that goes to questions of sustainability, how we address climate change, the need for better transport, protecting the culture and history and character of our area. What is in there, I think you'd be hard-pressed to actually disagree with. I think most of the residents in our community, in terms of that high-level statement, would be hard-pressed to disagree with what's there. I think some of the issues raised this evening, some of the concerns, really will be dealt with when we actually go to those place-based studies in the lead up to the actual LEP. This is a statement of higher principles, and it's higher principles as you read it that I think reflects the views of the majority of the Inner West. So I think that we should move to actually pass that on and get on with the next processes, which is getting into the work that needs to be done for the LEP that goes to those place-based studies. I'll place on record tonight that I believe there is a need for some renewal in Ashfield North. I'll place on record tonight, I believe that there are opportunities for renewal in both Dulwich Hill and Marrickville. But I'll also be indicating that as this process goes through, I'll not be supporting increases in density in places that have already recently had significant increases in density, such as around Arlington. It seems crazy that we would be looking at a place which has already just recently had significant increases in density to put more density. I think there are some real opportunities along Marrickville Road for some clever opportunities to look at some shop top housing and some other housing along those central routes. I think that makes sense. I also think that there are some opportunities in Ashfield North that we
Will you
really
stop
should
looking
be...
at your phone and look at the council, please?
Excuse me, Councillor Passis. Thank you for your interjection. I'll ask you to desist. Councillor Drury has the floor.
I know, but I'm trying to get your attention.
Yeah, okay.
And all you're doing is looking at your phone.
Well, at least it's not ringing like yours was 30 seconds ago.
Yeah, well, I turned it off.
Councillor Drury.
So I think as we go through the place-based studies, we do have an opportunity at honing in on those opportunities we have for renewal in certain parts of our community. I think what we need to do is protect the character and the history of those areas, and I think that those points are well made in the document we have before us. The points are well made in terms of sustainability, of addressing the points about climate change, about better transport options, and I think that this is a good high-level document to go off to planning, and we will then get down to the nitty-gritty in the next stage. I would urge all councillors to support this resolution.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Councillor McKenna? Withhold your right to speak. Councillor Passis?
I have to, as much as it hurts me, I have to agree with Councillor Drury. I cannot understand how all this work was done and the north side has not been mentioned. If we're talking about less reliance on cars and people using public transport, the neglected north side of Ashfield Station, it's there. How this is not incorporated in this, I cannot understand. We need high-rise on top of the commercial. It's happening all over Europe. They're countries that are hundreds and thousands of years old. They get it right. They've lived it. We should be looking to the way that they have set up their countries. This is the way we're going. We're relatively young. We should never make a mistake in this country on our planning. We must look at countries that have been there and done that, and it's working. We have the best public transport system, I believe, in the inner west in all of Australia. We have councillors on this council talking about climate change. We want to get rid of cars. We're spending thousands and thousands on bike lanes. I think I've only seen about half a dozen in the last 6 months. We've got the opportunity for housing right alongside railway stations, not in residential areas, which people still have to drive their cars to the railway station. It's the best incentive. So I have to agree with this and we have to move on. And I urge all councillors to vote for it, and there's a lot more on the agenda we need finishing tonight.
Councillors, further discussion. Councillor De Cruz.
I'd like to put up a foreshadowed motion again to defer this motion pending a briefing. I am really concerned that these papers, which are really significant documents, are coming to council on the agenda, and these were two huge documents, and I don't understand why they've come so late if it was so critical for us to consider them in time for this deadline. It alarms me that we do not have the economic and retail strategy ready for adoption either, so I don't really know what's informed the LSPS. So can I ask when the economic strategy will be ready?
I'll put that question to the officers.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we'll expect that to be presented within the next month or two.
Thank you for that.
And how do these strategies impact the LSPS? So if we actually defer the LSPS today, pending a briefing on the two strategies and the third strategy you're talking about, what changes can we make to the LSPS in the light of the amendments to the strategies?
I'm not sure I understand the question, but I'll pose it anyway.
As I answered that similar question previously, the strategies certainly informed the LSPS. The LSPS can progress ahead of the strategies. If major changes are made to the strategies that would see a fundamental deviation off the LSPS, then that would cause an issue. But overarchingly, there's no reason why the LSPS couldn't progress ahead of the strategies.
Thank you for that.
Okay, I actually think anyway, I'll leave my motion to defer to allow councillors to receive a briefing. I imagine there can be a submission of a draft LSPS to the department.
Well, that's not what your motion says, but okay. Councillor Stamoulis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I'm going to support and second the De Cruz foreshadowed motion. Look, I'm a little bit worried tonight that we're concentrating too much on timing, and I don't know what's so important about February the 26th, but it must be a special day for our nation that we need to get these documents done dead on the 26th of February. Never heard of that before, but yeah.
Call the meeting to order.
But I think our residents are watching us do this time-critical process, and yet, councillors, this is the bit that we're here for. This is the bit we're here for, and some are saying, "Oh, it's going to chop and change, and who cares? Let it go through." Others are saying there's a time-critical element, and our residents are standing before us saying, "We've got concerns, and we want you to do something about it." Now, in the next hour, we're going to try and address some of those things, but let me add that I read the LSP, and I found things, there weren't any references to density and the very tight, high densities that we have in our community. We already have those. There weren't any references to the very, very low levels of green space and open space, two vital things for us. The traffic volumes that we sustain through our area, the increasing need for transport, a little bit of reference to that. Also, I didn't get a flavour out of this, that we were three very distinct and different council areas. What I did get a flavour of is eventually that's going to be blended right out of us. And that worries me a little bit too. We've got beautiful old historic areas. We've got Balmain, we've got Dulwich Hill, we've got Haberfield, which represent very, very different eras. They're stunning in the Sydney perspective, and this document seems to blend the whole lot out of it, which concerns me greatly when I read it. And of course, people read things in different ways. They get their own nuances out, and they spin their own book. But this is what I'm reading, and I'm hoping residents will read it as well. We're harbourside. Part of the municipality is harbourside, part of it's bayside, near the airport. Very, very different issues. They didn't come out. And even the types of development for our future, whether it be residential or business development, really didn't strike me as being forward-thinking, future-oriented, or even exciting. So I think there's a lot, a reasonable amount of work. Heritage just didn't feature except for one or two lines, and the Inner West is all about heritage. It's all about our heritage. Look, I'm actually concerned about the document, but look, I'll defer it for a briefing and hopefully for some improvement along the way. Thank you.
As of this seconder, I reserve my right to speak, and I'll be very brief. Third paragraph of the report, it tells us that it needs to be have its final assurance check on the 3rd of March. That's next Monday. So it's quite clear that this document is due. The second thing is we have had, I would think, on the LSPS, I reckon we've had 6 briefings. We've also had, and they go back to probably, excuse me.
Call the meeting to order.
We have had, as a
call the meeting to order.
council,
Councillor Stammelson,
at
if you could
least
stop
6
interjecting over the
briefings.
top of
We
Councillor
had
McKenna.
a detailed workshop on the LSPS, which we had big bits of paper, and we all went in there to the at the back of this room, and we all gave our ideas, and that's about 2 months ago. And why is the time a bit constrained now? It's called Christmas break. We've been off for 2 months, and now we have to deal with these things which are due in the first week of March. So, unfortunately, we have had the briefings, and I really feel that you're portraying a false impression to the community that we are not being properly briefed. We've had so many, and then we've had, it came to us, the whole thing came to us as a briefing notes, and before it went on public exhibition, then it went on public exhibition, and there's much on the website in relation to the public exhibition reports, etc. So there's plenty of information there, and it isn't true that we haven't been briefed, and we do need to get things in on time.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, councillors, there's not a very complicated decision to be made here. We've got the primary motion for adoption of the recommendation, and then we've got a foreshadowed motion for indefinite deferral. So I don't know that it needs a lot more debate. Should we go to we'll go to Councillor Drury for his right of reply.
We fought really hard with Save Valley and Save Marrickville to get our planning powers back from the New South Wales government. We ran a campaign, a vigorous campaign with a lot of community involvement to get those powers back so we could make plans with our community. We are now on the steps towards making those plans. I think if we falter at this step, then we give the critics that say we can't do this, we flaff around, we can't make decisions, we give them ammunition. We give them ammunition. And as for the document that has nothing to do with heritage and transport and all of that, John, you are reading a different document to the rest of us. You are reading a different document because all the matters you raise are in this LSPS. I don't know what you are reading. If there were specific propositions to make changes, then you should have brought them here tonight. We could have debated and considered them. I don't think you paid enough attention to the briefings and to the information that we've been given. I don't think you're ready for this debate, and so you just want to put it off. You put it off and we prove ourselves a laughingstock. We put it off and we give succour to those who say we can't do this. We have consulted with the community. We have heard from the community. We have a statement in here which I think encapsulates the views of the majority of the community. We would be foolish not to pass this tonight.
Three, four, five. That has been carried.
Could we wait till Councillor Hesse gets back? Funny, he just walked out.
Next item. Item 10. Voluntary planning agreement policy. Councillors.
I'd like to move the policy with some amendments, which I have not yet sent to the minute taker, but I'll speak to them now and I'll send them through. I've also got some questions around the issues raised by Mr. Collins White from the Housing Committee. If I can speak to the issues that I do think that I understand first.
Because we suspended the agenda. Councillor Keir has the floor.
The first, we've had some discussions about this policy in the past, and I'm glad that this has come to council now for our consideration, because I think there has been, some useful discussion between councillors and also between staff and the councillors on this issue. And of course, it's important that we have a transparent process for what is often seen as sort of, structural bribery, and that we receive a benefit from a development on a voluntary basis in exchange for supporting a planning proposal. I think that there is a way that we can do this that's transparent, that has the faith of the community, although obviously I would support mandatory mechanisms whereby we could obtain the benefits that we obtain through VPAs. The first amendment that I'd like to put forward is just that we clarify the focus in this document on achieving the target of both our affordable housing policy and the housing strategy, which we've been discussing tonight, which is that we obtain 15% of total gross floor area of major planning agreements as affordable housing. And that was, I think, the first point raised by Mr. Collins White, and is a point that has been repeatedly mentioned at the Housing Committee as a priority. I don't think it's adequately reflected in the document that is a priority. That should be our baseline. The second point is around the Affordable Housing Fund. Mr. Collins White mentioned that there had been discussions at the Housing Committee recently. They were very glad that Council had supported establishing an Affordable Housing Fund, and are looking forward to the implementation of that. There was just a concern about what would happen to funds that had been obtained through VPAs as cash for the purpose of affordable housing in, say, the last 10 years, how that would be found and contributed to the fund. So that's the second point, that we do an audit of VPAs for, say, the last 10 years of Inner West and the constituent councils to find the cash that is being contributed for the purpose of affordable housing and that go into the fund. I think that's important because if we've obtained funding on the basis that it be used for affordable housing, of course we should use it for that purpose. I think it would be deceitful in the agreement with the developer to do otherwise. I believe the third point that was raised by Mr. Collins White on behalf of the Housing Committee related to residual land value. I've got some notes here on some of the comments he made, but I'm wondering if I can ask a question through the chair as to their comments on the questions he raised around the transparency and consistency in relation to the residual land value calculations and also the establishment of an independent panel. It's highly technical, but if we can try and understand it, I think that'd be useful.
So what's the question?
I've just articulated it, not very clearly, but I'm hoping that the staff can understand what Mr. Collins White was talking about.
I'll pose that question then.
Through the chair, councillors, the residual land value, at its simplest definition, I guess, is simply the value of the land with the relevant development potential. Okay, not the development value, but its development potential. We, as a matter of standard practice, get independent valuations for the RLV associated with all of our voluntary planning, agreement negotiations. Whether that's done through a panel or otherwise, I would think is largely irrelevant. But the point is that we've got trusted valuers that we do use in order to establish that RLV. With respect to the commentary around auditing or providing inventory on the developer contributions for affordable housing, we would see no issue with doing that.
Great.
Thank you for that. So we've got the
Chair,
yes.
Can I just ask one further question on
Yeah.
the RLD issue? I think I have some notes that were sent through to me. I think the question relates to whether the whole value of the development is included in the calculation of the RLD, including developer contributions. And that was an issue raised by Mr. Collins-White. Can I ask whether that's the approach taken to RLD calculations in the policy?
I'll put that question to the officers.
Through the chair, I don't have the exact question in front of me, but no, what's included is simply the value of the land as it stands. So it's a pure land valuation, irrespective of contributions or otherwise.
Thank you for that. So we've got a primary motion from Councillor Kiat. Is there a seconder for it? Seconded by Councillor Drury. Do you wish to speak to it?
No, I wasn't.
Right. Is there a seconder for the Kiat motion? Councillor Macri is moving a foreshadowed motion with the officer's recommendation. Is there a seconder for that? Seconded by Councillor Passis.
I can just clarify that I also move items 1 and 2 with these amendments. Items 1 and 2 of the recommendation is printed.
I'll ask you to liaise with the minute takers about that. Councillor Macri, do you wish to speak to your foreshadowed motion?
A VPA is a voluntary planning agreement based on an uplift above the prescribed controls of a site, and basically to channel all that into housing or affordable housing isn't always what the community needs. The first VPA I was involved with was that delivered the Dulwich Hill Library, a new state-of-the-art library. Now, that's what the community needed, primarily. They had this old cottage, which they were using as a library, which, strangely enough, shortly after the library moved out, the actual ceiling fell in on it. So it was good timing. So I'm a bit concerned about channeling everything we get into affordable housing. There are already mechanisms in there to capture affordable housing in other developments. VPAs are only a small amount, so it has to be a real targeted focus where those funds go. I mean, on the Mayoral Hospital site was a larger site. We achieved 9 affordable housing apartments. We achieved a $10 million cash benefit as well. Plus we achieved a $44 million library. On the larger sites, you can achieve more and there'd be more. But to say usually most VPAs are about a couple of units or they're not large scale. Not the ones I've seen come across my time on council. So I'm much more comfortable with the staff's recommendation to do 50% capture of the uplift on the land value. It still has to be able to be economically viable for the proponent to actually build the building. And with that comes more costs in increasing another floor or other things that complicate more basement level, more parking. All those things have to be calculated into the cost. So a 50% uplift on the land value is a really good outcome, So that's why I'm supporting the actual staff's recommendation. And I just think we really need to focus on the community needs, the wider community, because they're all there as well as people that need affordable housing.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Passis?
Yes, first of all, another councillor stated this previously. We are not the Department of Housing. We have properties in the inner west were in the millions, private homes. If we can, as we did with the Petersham RSL application, and as the previous, councillor just stated, we acquire these properties where we can. But that's not the be all and end all. And I really am fed up with certain councillors that since they were elected at the last election, coming into this council, wanting to depict that they're the only councillors that care about the homeless and that care about people that cannot afford to live in the inner west. I'm just about sick and tired of it. In one of the submissions from the gentleman who spoke earlier, he also stated that maybe council can look at putting a special rate levy on the residents so we can achieve these number of properties for the homeless and affordable housing. I'd like to see this council try to do it to the Asheville ratepayers. They're already paying through the nose for the swimming pool, the over-the-top swimming pool, and with the problems that we have with recycling, I can see that they'll be paying through the nose after the next election for that too. So, in one breath we have councillors getting up here saying how fantastic the staff are. In the next breath, they don't think the staff went far enough. I don't think there's one person that doesn't feel for the homeless and affordable housing, but that is life. We can only do so much. We are attempting to do as much as we can, but we cannot turn the inner west into a housing commission suburb. It cannot and will not happen. Nod your head, keep playing your politics and carry on like you Greens only care about the unfortunate, because you're not. And only a rich municipality can afford to look after the people that need help. And that's why we need to look at development, and we must give developers special dispensations if they can achieve 2 or 3 properties, but not try to pull every cent out of them. It won't be feasible for them to even come into the municipality.
Okay, councillors, I'll just make everyone aware of the fact that it's now almost 9 o'clock. We've got still dealt with a handful of items. We've got a lot on the agenda. Councillor.
Question through the chair. Can I get some advice from the officers, please, as to the impact of Councillor Kiat's motion and why these why the recommendations of the Housing Committee in relation to affordable housing weren't incorporated into the staff recommendations on the VPA?
Through the chair, councillors, the VPA policy is designed to be the mechanism that sets out the process under which council calculates the VPA. Okay, that's all it's intended to do. It simply sits alongside the affordable housing policy. We felt like it was a cleaner policy outcome not to duplicate that, because we still, when we negotiate all of our voluntary planning agreements, we'll always have the affordable housing policy in the front of our mind, and it's not to set that it necessarily one prevails over the other. They simply sit complementary. So we wouldn't be suggesting that it needs to be incorporated, and it allows greater flexibility actually if you've only got the affordable housing in one place.
If I can ask a follow-up question on that. So if I'm understanding this correctly, if we were to pass the officer's recommendation of the 50%, it doesn't preclude us from actively seeking our affordable housing target of 15%, and in fact we would still try and do that.
I'll put that question to the officers.
Through the chair, councillors, that's right. The overarching provision is the 50%. Of that 50% uplift, we will then work out how much of that would be contributed through an affordable housing contribution. It's important to remember that voluntary planning agreements are voluntary, and that in any negotiation around a voluntary planning agreement, some proponents are more willing than others to provide affordable housing as part of that 50% uplift.
Thank you for that. Councillors. Councillor McKenna.
Just a further follow-up question. So if the 15% is in there, as proposed by Councillor Kiat, is that going to preclude us from having other things like open space, etc., in the negotiations?
I'll put that question to the officers. I'm going to take, it's not on the screen, I'm going to take that on notice and allow the officer just to have a read of that. Councillor Drury.
Well, I'll venture an opinion, is that potentially in some circumstances it may. And I think if we are to have voluntary planning agreements, and I must admit I have some concerns about that whole process, but if we are to have them, then it does seem to me that the objectives of the policy are right. But it also does seem to me that what we should be doing is also referencing in those objectives that we will be seeking to have that 15% affordable housing component. I think as one of the objectives, I don't think I can support the notion that they are compliant. What I do support in terms of overall objectives is that we in fact look at what affordable housing that we can get in the mix of the other things that we might want out of a VPA. So I'm proposing to the mover of the motion that item 1 is amended in a very clever way, which I'm trying to find, is that rather than saying that ensure that VPAs are compliant, that we actually say that council seeks to implement the affordable housing policy as part of the principles and the other types of benefits, yada, yada, yada. So we put it in the mix.
Yada, yada, yada doesn't translate.
I'll call the meeting to order. Councillor Drury has the
How
floor.
do you spend it?
Councillor Drury has the floor. Councillor Passos, please desist.
All the other matters mentioned in the resolution point 1 after we go to the principles. I have no objection to. Oh, hang on. What? Rescind the VPAs of the former council. Is that the
That's the recommendation.
Right. Noting. Okay. So, and that we establish the fund and we actually go to have some sort of auditing of those. I'd support that resolution. So, Councillor Kidd, I'd implore you to think about. Let's just embed the words as consideration as part of the process, which they are already, but it doesn't hurt to actually have those words in, and then we move on. But to actually indicate that they must be compliant, I believe, ties our hands in a way which I concur with Victor, actually does mean that we may place undue emphasis
Councillor,
on
your
this
time has
rather
expired.
than other things which may be of benefit for a wider section of the community.
Councillor, can I seek clarification? Are you moving that as an amendment to the Kiat motion or to the Macri motion?
I'm seeking and the words that say the policy be amended.
And I'm going to ask you to liaise with the minute takers about your amendment. I was just clarifying whether it was to both motions or one or the other. Okay, thank you for that. Councillors, further discussion? It's 9 o'clock. There's no further discussion. Councillor Macri.
Chair, what this does, and as the staff explained it, affordable housing is in the mix as in everything else. But when you compete,
This is just
when
an
you
additional
compete that you
speech.
need affordable housing over an upgrade to a
Thank you,
children's
Councillor
playground.
Macri. You've already spoken to the item.
I'm speaking about the amendment.
Right,
I'm
okay.
speaking about the amendment.
Yeah.
When you actually say you're going to actually put affordable housing against the upgrade to a children's playground, it's about getting the right community need, and that's what the policy will deliver, not trying to tie the staff down. Because that's what you're voting on, Councillor Cat. You want us to take money away from children so you can move more people.
Okay, so we're going to deal with the amendment from Councillor Drury, but I'm just going to ask him to provide that wording to the minute takers. Okay, we'll deal with it once it's been provided, although Councillor Macri's already made a speech in that regard. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak to the Drury amendment? No? Is there a seconder for the Drury amendment? Seconded by Councillor McKenna. I might just check, having heard Councillor Kiat, having heard Councillor Drury's explanation of what he's seeking to move, are you amenable to that being incorporated into your primary motion? Okay, so it's not incorporated. Have you sent that off? Right. Okay. I'll ask the minute taker to display the Drury amendment so that we can vote on it. So this is an amendment. It's essentially to try and fix the problem articulated by the officers and Councillor Macri with the Kiat primary motion. So Councillor Drury is moving that the policy be amended to seek, will this substitute point 1? That the policy be amended to seek to implement the Council's affordable housing policy and housing strategy to obtain 15% of total gross floor area of major planning agreements, including any development larger than 20 units, to be transferred to the Council as affordable housing units. You'll have to, I'll put that as a question to Councillor Drury. I'll just ask the minute takers to scroll back up to the point that Councillor Drury is trying to amend. Is compliance not the word that you're just simply seeking to delete, Councillor?
It is the word I'm seeking to delete and go from plan to seek to address.
Okay, the minute takers capture that. Okay, this is rapidly descending into...
We need advice from the officers.
Well, we've received the advice from the officers. I'm going to put the Drury amendment to the Kiat motion. All those in favour, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That has been defeated. Very simple matter we've now got before us. I'll go to Councillor Kiat for his right of reply. We've got the officer's recommendation as a foreshadowed motion from Councillor Macri. We've got the Kiat primary motion. Councillor Kiat.
So, Councillor Drury, thank you for your contribution. I've incorporated the wording so that it now reads, the policy be amended to ensure that VPA seek to implement. So I think that captures the spirit of what you were trying to say. Look, I think we've had some pretty... The arguments that have been deployed against this effectively amount to, well, we've got 1,700 homeless people in the inner west. We have over 6,000 households in housing stress, but actually, maybe we can go and gold plate our library with extra funding from the developer by giving them extra stories so that we can go and build another playground, which we should be doing from our Section 94 funds, which we should be doing from our rates. When we are entering into a VPA, we are agreeing to enter into an agreement with the developer where they are achieving additional gross floor area, and in exchange, they are offering us affordable housing. I don't think that we should be using that for other means when we're not even reaching that low 15% target, which is in our affordable housing policy and in our housing strategy. Now, I've already told you today that the housing strategy says that we need to add 571 affordable dwellings per year if we are going to meet the affordable housing gap. What does that mean? It means that if we don't meet that gap, that this area increasingly becomes the Potts Point of the inner west. Is that what we want? Is that what we want? We need to take the steps we can take. The state government can take the steps it can take. The federal government can take the steps it will take. And we know what that is under Liberal governments. It's nothing. So it's completely incorrect to say that this is not what the community needs. And it's also incorrect to say that there's some niche issue. This affects everyday households that can't afford the housing in the inner west. That is a fact. Everyone knows that.
We'll call the meeting to order.
And
Councillor Kiat has
Councillor,
the floor.
that is exactly the kind of argument that we're supporting. Councillor Passis asking poor people to move out of the inner west. So really, I implore councillors, all we are asking is that we comply with our policy. Now, with respect to Ms. Richardson, what she said is we want the flexibility to be able to determine how we appropriate the funds that are being offered by the developer. What I am saying is, as a first priority, let's meet our policy commitment. Otherwise, let's scrap it. If you don't want to meet that in the BPA policy, then why don't you bring a motion to the next council meeting to scrap the affordable housing policy?
Okay, well, we've now got a primary motion to substantially amend the affordable housing policy, and then we've got a foreshadowed motion to adopt the affordable housing policy. So I'm not sure that anyone's opposed to it. No, Councillor Drury, the debate has closed. Councillor Kiat has made his right of reply. Seconding the primary motion from Councillor Kiat is Councillor Porteous. I'll put that. All those in favour, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That has been defeated. I'll now put the foreshadowed motion for adoption of the officer's recommendation and of the policy. Moved by Councillor Macri, seconded by Councillor Passis. All those in favour, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That has been carried. Okay, we've got one more item on the suspended agenda, which is the local traffic committee meeting. I'm going to propose that we deal with that item, then we have a very brief adjournment. We come back and go into committee of the whole to deal with the urgent matters that are in the confidential papers. And then we come back to item 9, which we deferred. And hopefully we can get all that done by 9:30. So, local traffic committee meeting, 2nd of December and 3rd of February 2020. Can I begin by just posing a question maybe to the officers or to the traffic committee chair in relation to the issue about the pedestrian crossing, the safer crossing for students in particular at Carrington Road. Can I just get a bit of an outline of what assessment has been made of that and the recommendation?
Thank you, Chair. When staff looked at this item, they were looking in particular at the pedestrian refuge. So they have recommended that the pedestrian refuge be brought up to the appropriate current RMS standards. If we were to look at a pedestrian crossing, we would have to demonstrate that that location meets the warrants. So we would have to go away and do a traffic and pedestrian count to assess that location for a pedestrian crossing.
And were those counts conducted as part of this assessment?
We have the vehicle counts, we don't have the pedestrian counts at this stage.
Okay, well I might just flag my preference that we do undertake those counts because a number of residents have raised it with me, so I'll just prepare that as an amendment to the minutes.
I've got an amendment in draft as well, Darcy, which I think
excellent.
meets
Councillor
the
Hesse,
same.
over to you.
I think I'd like to move mine. I sent that to Catherine earlier. If you could do that, Catherine. Oh, yeah, I'm happy to move the report as a whole.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to take discussion on if we need to make it better, but that a further report be provided to council to examine the provision of a pedestrian crossing on Carrington Road near Remick Street, Marrickville, to improve pedestrian safety, particularly the safety of students attending Tempe High School. If that covers what you were, I think that's good. And I know Mr. I call him AJ, Mr. Johnson I ran that past him earlier today and he was happy with that, so yeah.
Great. Okay, and do we need to specify that that would include pedestrian counts or is that inherent in the motion? Okay, cool.
Right, thank you.
So that's moved by Councillor Hesse, seconded by myself. Councillor Drury?
Mover, can I also ask you to consider an amendment which is to write to Transport New South Wales and Transport System to request that they ensure safe traffic management and support the introduction of opposing directional one-way streets in Clissold and Seaview Street, Ashfield, with the associated changes to those bus routes.
In respect of what the resident said earlier, yes, I accept that amendment. Thank you.
Okay, that's incorporated as well. Councillor Passos?
Yes, well, I'm against that because if the councillors know the area at all, that's where I was brought up. There is a problem with the retirement village, with deliveries. The bus has been going down there since when I was born, so that's a long while ago. You do this, you're only going to send traffic where? To Robert Street, where the Masonic Hospital is, which is a narrow street in itself. One car has to stop to let another one pass. Where will the buses go? That bus route, this has been brought up at the last council, the old Ashfield Council, and State Transit would not even entertain it. We have problems. We have problems, yes, with the Cardinal Freeman and Stocklands with their deliveries. What council must do here is try, the traffic committee or the officers, speak to the people of Stocklands and tell them they must have their deliveries from either Queen Street or Victoria Street. They're much wider streets. Apparently a few years ago they closed one section off in Queen Street. I can understand Seaview Street is narrow. And if trucks are delivering from that street, it must stop. The Speaker did say, I spoke to him last night and I told him that I could not agree with what he wanted. As for the school children, the schools nominated are very far away from the area. Maybe the school children congregate there to catch buses. That's all over Sydney. All over Sydney. They're not primary school, they're high school children. You cannot. We can make it look like, oh, we're trying to do something, let's contact State Transit, move your buses. It won't happen. What we should be doing is speaking to Stocklands and tell them they must make provision for their delivery trucks to either enter from Victoria or Queen Street. And I move that way.
Call the meeting to order.
If I could have a seconder for that, I'd appreciate it, because I find this will alleviate the concerns of the residents there.
Okay, I'll ask
Nobody's going to do it. Fair enough. Thank you.
I'll ask you to provide that wording to the minute taker. Okay, Councillor Catt.
I've got a question through you, Chair.
Yeah.
It's in relation to this item around Cardinal Freeman Village. I thank you, Mr. Kerr, for speaking tonight, and I did read the material that you sent through. My question is about the consultation with residents of Cardinal Freeman in relation to this proposal. Can we just get some comment on what feedback we got from residents of Cardinal Freeman Village on the proposal?
I'll put that question to the officers.
Through the chair, if we were to look at a one-way system, then we would have to engage with the community. Because the initial feedback from Transport was that they didn't support it, council staff didn't pursue it any further.
I'll just make some brief comments. I actually, I know some people that live there.
I know a lot.
Good for you.
Councillor Catt, please proceed.
And the feedback was not all in support of the one-way streets. I had initially thought that that might make traffic calmer. That wasn't seen to be the case, and it was also, there was some concern that changes to the bus stops would be confusing and cumbersome. So this is something that had been on my radar for some time as a possible good change, but I don't think that it's supported by a majority of residents there, as far as I can tell. And if it's not supported by Transport for New South Wales, then I don't see.
That's what I just said.
Proceed with it.
I can understand that.
Okay, Councillor De Cruz.
I'm not quite sure. We seem to be going round in circles. The point B is what was investigated and what was reported to the traffic committee. They identified a number of issues with this. One is that it is complicated to have two locations for bus stops for the aged people who walk and use pedestrian traffic. I've actually visited Cardinal Freeman Village, and I actually think the part of the problem is it's got so many roads and cars in it from the residents that's part of the problem. That's why I'm supporting Councillor Pass's suggestion to actually take traffic off this road if that helps. I understand one of the other issues is that there's an Opal aged care facility, which is ambulances and things coming in. So I actually don't support point B. I actually support the officer's recommendation. Making it one way was suggested that would actually increase the speed in this road, making it more dangerous. It would actually inconvenience people to have the relocation of the bus stop, and the buses cannot get into Seaview Street. So these were the items that were actually considered, and it is in the report, and this is exactly what has come back. So you're just asking to do it again.
Okay, thank you for that. So, Councillor Macri.
Chair, just regarding a recommendation we have from the Traffic Committee regarding development on Victoria Road. It was about, one of the recommendations was to receive and note the report, and staff recommended a no right turn during the AM peak period into the actual development. At the time, we asked the staff what was the actual distance from the intersection, which caused the concern about if it was too close to the intersection, that could cause banking up to the actual intersection. And staff didn't have the right figure on hand. They estimated about 50 metres, and then the RMS raised concerns that 50 metres, it could be 10 cars, and then they'll be back at the intersection. But once I investigated and found out, it's actually 150 metres away from the intersection, and would not interfere with the AM peak in that respect, queuing back to the intersection. And basically, the vehicle movements AM against it are about 445 per hour, and there's been there's 41 maybe would turn right, and the traffic report, based on the current traffic and increase in traffic arising from development, the modelling indicates that no descendable queuing resulting from the turn. A queue of less than 3 vehicles, a delay of up to 5 seconds. Despite at the moment there are 12 active driveways on site with lots of heavy vehicles using them, and no accidents from a right-hand turn currently. So I think that recommendation, with that further information now, we should actually change that recommendation at this council, at the meeting here, to a 12-month trial. If there's an issue, then we should implement the no right-hand turn at AM. Good question.
Okay, Councillor Macri is going to provide the wording of that amendment to the minute taker. He's going to identify which page of the business papers he's referring to. Yep. Yes, go on, Councillor Passos.
I think the shed in Fox's Lane, trying to turn Fox's Lane into a shared road will not work. If anybody knows that area at all, you have trucks, vans, cars turning left off Liverpool Road, down Fox's Lane. You've also got them coming up from...
Order, is this a second speech?
No, it's a second issue.
Amendment.
Yeah, cop that, pal.
Okay, stick to the business at hand, please, Councillor Passos.
It is very, very dangerous to have that laneway as a shared road. Again, if councillors know the area, you know it's very problematic. And you'll remember when this was first touted, we had a beautiful photo of Fox's Lane when the development went through and Markham Place had the upgrade. We had a beautiful photo of coffee shops, people walking with poodles, people riding bikes. The laneway looked the size of a football field. I would like all councillors to go down and have a look at that lane. First of all, I'm forever putting in requests and people are putting in requests for rubbish to be picked up from the lane. It's back at the shops. So, and to have a shared lane there is very, very dangerous. As I said, you've got delivery trucks, you've got people that don't want to travel up to Brown Street to turn left. They do a quick left into Fox's Lane and they'll be collecting whoever's sharing the lane.
Okay, so what's the amendment, councillor Passos?
That it's not, just throw it out.
Throw what out?
The recommendation that it's a shared road.
Okay, I'll ask you to provide the wording of your amendment to the minute taker.
Catherine, can you write down throw it out?
You need to identify what you're deleting, councillor Passos. Okay, councillor Macri, are you able to identify for councillor Hesse the particular?
It is. It's on page 14 is the, page 135 is the attachment.
Yeah.
But it has to be amended in the actual submission. It's a receiver note. In the traffic committee, it's a receiver note.
Right. Okay, so can you provide the wording to the minute taker of the amendment?
We'd have to move it in our submission to the development, which is coming up.
Right, well,
So
you
just
could
alert everyone.
still move that as an amendment to the adoption of the minutes tonight, or you're going to...
No, we'll hold it over.
Okay, no problem. Yes, councillor Drury.
Can I just seek that not be supported? I think that there is, in fact, a really nice vision for Fox's Lane to be a much more human and walkable kind of space. Councillor Passos is right. At the moment, people tear through that little strip at crazy speeds. And I think that if we actually move to a shared lane and that we get some enforcement of that, we can in fact change behaviour and activate one of the few parts of Ashfield where we could have some outdoor life and liveliness. We can have people walking around, enjoying some of the cafes and restaurants which will go down there eventually. And I believe.
I'll call the meeting to order. Councillor Drury has the floor.
So there was a vision for Fox's Lane, which was about that area being a far more outdoor area, an area where people could walk around with cafes and bars and the like. I think that vision is a good vision for Ashfield. It's one of the few laneways we have which could accommodate that. And I think the proposition that we have a 10-kilometre shared zone there is a very commendable part of that vision that Councillor Passos never supported. Never supported, and she's continuing not to support it now, just as she never supported the Ashfield swimming pool, and she continues not to support it. So we rehash and rehash old arguments. This is simply putting in place a vision for a more lively and livable part of Ashfield. I'd urge people not to support that.
Thank you very much. I'll call the meeting to order. I'll call the meeting to order. I'll call the meeting to order. Now, councillors, I would like us to get through the Traffic Committee minutes if we can. It's 9:20. We haven't dealt with a lot of items tonight. Got a big backlog, and we've got committee of the whole items that we need to deal with immediately after the conclusion of this. So, Councillor Kiat, yes, you've already spoken.
I don't wish to speak. I only just want to ask that the mover of the item just allow us to deal with these very separate items separately. Okay,
well, we'll get to that. So we've got Councillor Hesse had moved adoption of the minutes with the inclusion of his amendment on Carrington Road, which I supported and became the seconder of the primary motion. We've then got a second amendment which was proposed by Councillor Drury in relation to item 9. Councillor Hesse, are you willing to incorporate that into the primary motion?
I think I had that people want to vote on it separately,
Okay,
so I'm happy to go in seriatim, and that's
no
fine.
problem. And then we've got an amendment from Councillor Passos and Councillor De Cruz. If we could just get the minute takers to scroll down. So they become amendments C and D, if you like.
Councillors, that's what the council put forward.
I'll call the meeting to order. Call the meeting to order.
And please go down to
Okay, I'll
Fox's
adjourn
Lane
the
tomorrow
meeting for a period of 2 minutes.
and have a look at Fox's Lane.
The meeting is adjourned. Sorry, we can't continue the business while there's interjection. Resume the meeting once we've got a quorum. Councillor Drury, Councillor Catt, Councillor De Cruz, if you would resume your seats, we'll be able to resume the meeting. Okay, so we've got 4 amendments to deal with separately. The first is moved by Councillor... can I just ask you to scroll down? Thank you. First is moved by Councillor Drury. Is there a seconder for that? Certainly happy to second it. Councillor York is the seconder. Second amendment moved by Councillors Passis and De Cruz. Third amendment moved by Councillor Passis. Is there a seconder for the Passis amendment? Councillor Stamos. There may be by the time we get to voting on it. Okay, we'll deal with the Drury-York amendment first. All those in favour, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3. Item 9, Clissold Street. I'll just recommit that. That's incorporated into the primary motion. No, sorry. The officers were just interjecting to explain that we needed to deal with the Carrington Road amendment. I've explained that that's part of the primary motion because it was moved by the mover. So the first amendment we'll deal with, because everyone seems quite confused, is the Drury-York amendment, which is in relation to item 9, Clissold Street, Ashfield. Is everyone clear on that? If you're in support of it, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'll use my casting vote to support that. That is incorporated into the primary motion. Sorry, I should have read the names out while we did it. They can work it out from the minutes if they... Can we keep going to the next amendment? Don't worry about it. We can work it out later. I got the count correct. Okay, next amendment, moved by Councillor Passis, seconded by Councillor De Cruz, that traffic officers meet with Stocklands, Cardinal Freeman Village with the view to have delivery and large vehicles enter from either Victoria Street or Queen Street. All those in favour...
Point of order. Councillor Passis isn't here. Does she have to be in the chamber to for a motion to be moved, or
No,
can
she
it be
doesn't.
done by remote control?
No, she doesn't need to be. All those in... You guys let me know when you're ready. All those in support of that amendment, please raise your hands. That is supported unanimously and is incorporated into the primary motion. There's one final amendment moved by Councillor Passis, seconded by Councillor Stamoulis in relation to item 1, the Esplanade Markham Place, the Fox Lane debate. All those in favour of the Passis-Stamoulis amendment, please raise your hands. All those against? That has been defeated unanimously. We'll now put the primary motion for adoption of both of the Traffic Committee minutes, moved by Councillor Hesse, seconded by myself. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously. Okay, I'm going to adjourn the meeting for a period of 5 minutes and then come back and move that we move into Committee of the Whole. So I'll just let everybody in the gallery know that we'll seek to deal with that as quickly as we can and hope to have you back in here for any items that you're still in attendance for by, say, 9:45. The meeting is adjourned. Seconded by Councillor McKenna. We'll vote on that as soon as there's 8 councillors in the room. Excellent. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. That was a motion to go into confidential session. Councillors, we've got the 3 items on the agenda of the